Welcome to Ichiraku Ramen, and thank you for joining me for another journey into the world of shinobi. Before we begin, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who listens, supports the channel, and enjoys these stories. Today's story is part 2 of Positive Intervention. In this story, Naruto's childhood was filled with loneliness. Ignored by the village, feared by the people, and forced to grow up alone. But what if things had gone differently? What if someone had stepped in before the damage was done? At the age of 7, Jiraiya of the Sannin makes a decision that will change Naruto's life forever. Instead of leaving him behind in Konoha, Jiraiya takes Naruto on the road, raising him as his apprentice and teaching him the true ways of a shinobi. For 5 years Naruto trains under the legendary Toad Sage, learning powerful jutsu, discipline, and what it truly means to protect the people he cares about. When Naruto finally returns to the Hidden Leaf at age 12, he is no longer the lonely prankster the village remembers. He has become something far more dangerous. The student of Jiraiya. This is a fan-made story inspired by the world of Naruto. All characters in the original universe belong to their respective creators. This narration is created for entertainment purposes as part of a transformative storytelling experience. The story itself was written by Stolen Hawk 22, and full credit goes to the original author. If you would like to read the original version, the link to the story is included in the video description below. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 7. Naruto and Sasuke Part 2. 1 year 10 months after Sasuke left Mount Myoboku. 2 years 8 months after Naruto left Konoha, January. Pervy Sage, where are we going? The 10-year-old asked. Jiraiya looked at the boy, who had grown a considerable amount in the last 2 years. We're headed back to the Land of Fire. I want to introduce you to someone, and you might just run into someone you already know. Naruto was excited by this, but Jiraiya cut him off before he could further question. You know the drill. What's shinobi rule number 8? Information is like ramen? Naruto questioned even though he already knew the answer. Jiraiya nodded. He had told Naruto that information was like gold, to which Naruto responded that gold wasn't all that important to him. He'd rather have a useful metal, like more kunai, or a sword. Most importantly though, he'd rather have ramen. The young blonde missed ramen. Sure, he still had it when they came across a town, but that was not as often as he would have liked, and the ramen was never as good as Ichiraku's. Right, if you want information, you gotta work for it. Would you give away ramen for free? The boy paled and shook his head vigorously. Exactly. I want to see 5 perfect shunshin, body flicker, in a row. The body flicker technique was an invaluable one for all ninja, and performing one was not all that difficult. Performing several in a row, especially with a change of direction each time, was very difficult. Stop and starting so frequently threw off a ninja's balance, and could easily result in motion sickness. Something Naruto was currently experiencing as he threw up this morning's breakfast, a rabbit that wasn't quite faster than the blonde. Sensei. Naruto had learned the slightest amount of respect as far as what to call him and when. Can't I do 5 gunshots instead? I never throw up after those, and they're way cooler. He complained. Alright. Why don't you shoot 5 of them at me in rapid succession, and if you manage to hit me, I'll teach you a real flashy jutsu that the 4th Hokage invented. Jiraiya responded confidently. Naruto grinned bright as the sun. The Yondaime was his hero, and now he would get to learn one of his jutsu. You got it, geezer. Just let me know when you're ready. Naruto shouted. Before Jiraiya could reply, Naruto formed the hand seals, holding the tiger seal at the end, yelled, "Water release!" Gunshot, and spat out a ball of water about half Jiraiya's height. The Toad Sage had to give it to him, at least he knew how to use the element of surprise. That didn't mean that Jiraiya had to let him win though. Jiraiya made his own hand seal and shunshined out of the way with a grin befitting the ease at which he did it. Naruto made a face at him, and wound up another gunshot, a little bigger than the last, but once again, Jiraiya evaded him. This happened 2 more times, and after his 4th attempt, Naruto molded the largest gunshot that he could, a little over Jiraiya's height, and fired it as fast as he could at his sensei. The Toad Sage flickered out of the way with a careless ease yet again. Naruto was pissed. You know Naruto, I think you could improve your speed. A 6th water gunshot flew at the Toad Sage faster than the previous 5, though smaller than its predecessors. Yes, I got him, Naruto shouted. He immediately felt something cold and sharp up against his neck, and wouldn't even risk a gulp for fear of nicking him. Now do you see why the body flicker is so important to master, Naruto? Naruto didn't respond, instead he just chuckled and poofed into smoke. Up in the nearest tree the real Naruto was beaming at how he had pulled one over on his sensei. He was committing to memory the face that Jiraiya had made, when he too poofed into smoke. Naruto didn't have time to feel shocked, as there was another kunai pressed to his neck. 40 years too young, kid. That was a nifty trick though. Probably would have had me if your shunshin was faster. Jiraiya laughed at him. Damn it. I really wanted to learn the fourth jutsu, ya know. Naruto grumbled. He normally could sense where Jiraiya was, something they had discovered came relatively easy to him. Jiraiya, however, was very adept at suppressing and masking his chakra, and Naruto couldn't feel even an iota of his presence if the Sannin put forth the effort to conceal himself. Well, Naruto, the fourth's original fighting style revolved around the shunshin and kawarimi. He used them to move about the battlefield with extreme speed. You read about his flying ragen in one of the books that Sarutobi sent you, right? Naruto nodded excitedly. The flying ragen was probably the coolest jutsu he had ever heard of, and he knew it was the Yondaimi's most signature move. He could teleport anywhere, and end a fight in less than a second. He had even been issued as an sulfur monosulfide rank shinobi and given flee-on-sight orders during the Third Great Shinobi War. Badass. Jiraiya interrupted his daydreaming of his hero. Good. Well, step 1 to utilizing that jutsu was already having the fighting style down. If you want to learn the flying ragen, you better master the body flicker and substitution to the point where it's completely natural and you have full control over them. Naruto nodded again. If he wanted to surpass the fourth, first he had to reach him, and learning what was considered the most dangerous jutsu in the elemental nations was a good start. The blonde flashed through hand signs with practiced ease, and in a split second his sensei was looking at a log. Don't worry, sensei, I'll surpass the fourth Hokage, just you wait, ya know. He shouted from the ground a good ways away. Jiraiya let a smirk show, the kid was good entertainment if nothing else. Jiraiya's body flickered down to Naruto, and the two started walking southwest towards the Land of Fire. They had spent the last month in the Land of Hot Springs, Jiraiya meeting with a contact in his spy network, and getting in some extracurricular research while he was there. Sensei, permission to use my clones to train with the shunshin? Naruto asked. Jiraiya sighed, thinking back to the Gaki's breakthrough discovery. Naruto was trying to get down a new chakra control exercise. He was required to balance a kunai, pointy end up, using his chakra. Essentially he would just be using the leaf-sticking exercise, just on a much more difficult object. He kept using too much chakra, and the kunai would almost bounce off of his arm, repelled by his dense chakra. Jiraiya had found him in their camp clearing with 10 clones doing the exercise. Jiraiya of course knew that shadow clones transferred their memories back to the user, but he distinctly remembered not making it to that part of the explanation, because said blonde terror had cut him off. What are you doing? Jiraiya inquired. I'm using my clones to train? Naruto asked like it was obvious. This made Jiraiya think that he had caught on to one of the more important intricacies of the jutsu. Why is that? Jiraiya prodded further. Well, if one of me can figure it out in a few hours, 10 of me should be able to figure it out in like 30 minutes, right? Naruto asked. Jiraiya nodded at this. While the training time wasn't necessarily pure division, if none of the clones figured out the trick to the exercise, he wouldn't progress past the beginning stages. It still would cut down on training time vastly. While this sounded nice, the downside was extreme migraines and potential brain damage or death. Knowing the Kyuubi and Uzumaki blood combination gave Naruto an unrivaled healing factor, he decided to watch and let the blonde work for a little bit. After about 10 minutes, one of the Narutos signaled the rest, and they all huddled up. After another minute, they broke apart and got back to work. What was that meeting all about? Jiraiya asked. Well, Naruto 7 figured out that if I treat it like the tree walking exercise and try and stick the kunai to me, it becomes easier to balance. Naruto explained. Jiraiya was really curious now, and then it dawned on him. Wait, are you just using the clones to come up with different ways to complete your training? Jiraiya questioned. Well yeah, what else would they be for? Naruto replied. Jiraiya facepalmed. If he took care of the boy any longer, he was going to end up with a dented nose. Gaki, your shadow clones return their experiences to the user when they're dispelled. You don't have to have them stop to explain to you what they did that worked. You can just pop them, and their memories will become yours. Jiraiya drawled. Naruto didn't seem to comprehend this. But they have a different body from me, so they have a different brain. How could I have their memories? Do you remember the night you opened the Uzumaki scroll? Naruto nodded. Do you remember when I pushed you into that river? Naruto scowled and nodded again. The old pervert had pushed him in several times if he remembered correctly. Gaki, I didn't push the real you in, I only pushed your clones in. You stayed in the clearing reading the scroll. Naruto's mouth opened and closed like a fish at this. The memories felt real, but they weren't particularly important events, so he couldn't really remember what happened before or after. Maybe that was because his clone didn't exist for very long before, and ceased to exist after. Jiraiya saw that it still didn't quite line up properly in Naruto's brain, so Jiraiya took a different route. Show me how well you can balance the kunai, he said. Naruto nodded and gave it a shot. He made it about 3 seconds. Jiraiya nodded at this and signaled Naruto's 10 clones to move out of the clearing about 30 feet with him. After 5 minutes, Jiraiya came back with the clones, and popped them one by one. He then asked Naruto to repeat the exercise. He managed 30 seconds this time. What's the secret to balancing the kunai? His sensei asked. Well, I just have to try and wrap my chakra around the ring and draw it in, just like you told me. Naruto explained. Right, but I didn't tell you. I told your clones in the clearing. Do you remember what you were looking at when I told you that? Naruto thought back to it, and could clearly picture several of his clones in his line of vision. Actually, he could remember Jiraiya telling him several times, with different angles of his clones. He could also remember Jiraiya stabbing him in the chest. He frowned and rubbed it. I see you've caught on. It's a peculiar feeling, isn't it? Jiraiya asked. What's that word mean? And don't stab my clones anymore, I can just dispel them, ya know. Naruto replied. Peculiar means strange, and usually in a particular way. Like a type of strange you haven't experienced before. Jiraiya explained. And I know you can just dispel them, but it's more fun to stab them because they look like you, and you annoy me. The Toad Sage explained. Naruto stuck his tongue out at him. He knew his sensei didn't mean anything malicious by his words, but he also knew that he was going to continue to stab his clones. Jiraiya laughed at his young charge. I don't want you using more than 10 at a time to train with them for now though, and I forbid you from using them without my permission, and for more than an hour for each clone before dispelling them. The jutsu passes on mental fatigue, so every clone you have will multiply your fatigue each time you pop one. You already have so few brain cells, I wouldn't want you losing any more. Jiraiya's grin was downright evil. Naruto threw a kunai at him knowing it wouldn't hit. He was insulted to see that the white-haired man caught it in his teeth. Salt in the wound. Fine, I'll follow your stupid rules, but you have to help me with my calligraphy skills. Naruto said. Jiraiya agreed. The boy had been having some trouble with his writing, and Jiraiya wouldn't let him advance to explosive tags without perfect handwriting. The two bonked forehead protectors, both of which said oil on them. It was an agreement Naruto had come up with when Jiraiya explained they were the only 2 people in the world with them. Shaking hands was too stale according to the blonde, and not unique enough for him. Jiraiya was brought out of his mental flashback by the Gaki's vibration. The boy was literally vibrating waiting for permission. Jiraiya thought his new seal would drain some of his energy, but he still was just a ball of non-stop excitement. Very well, 10 clones, no more than an hour and a half for each one. You know how to stagger them so you don't get a headache. If you do get one, tell me right away. Jiraiya said sternly. Naruto rolled his eyes at him. He had never gotten a headache from using the shadow clone training technique. When he pushed his time limit and dispelled them all at once, he would be extremely disoriented for a few seconds, but that was the worst of it. Yes, pervy sage, I'll be very careful not to lose any of my precious brainpower. The blonde grinned at him. It was Jiraiya's turn to roll his eyes as the blonde formed his favorite hand seal, multiplied by 10, and barked out orders to them. All 10 clones saluted seriously, and started body flickering around at different speeds and distances. Naruto found it was best that the clones tried different ways of doing a jutsu in order to find the optimal way to do it. Once he found the optimal way, All the clones would focus on increasing speed, power, precision, or volume, depending on the jutsu. The first couple of times he had tried it, it felt like he had only gotten better at being mediocre at what he was practicing. Like he had practiced at a slow pace a lot of times. Once he got the hang of the method, he could essentially have 10 people try a jutsu or exercise 10 different ways, and then hammer the optimal technique home nearly 10 times as fast. The initial stage took longer than one would expect, but once he had it figured out, he could improve faster than anybody. Sensei and student continued walking to intercept with Jiraiya's unknown colleague. Naruto either chatting away with Jiraiya, himself, or to a clone of himself, or Gamakichi, who had just transitioned from tadpole to toad. The small orange and purple toad was more than happy to sit on Naruto's head and chat with him, so long as he was provided snacks. Naruto was happy to have a friend to chat with, and summoned the fist-sized toad often while traveling. 1 hour out of Konoha. Kakashi, why are we walking at civilian pace? Ma, what's the rush, my cute little apprentice? The copy nin asked. We could be using this time to train, I can't let that loser get ahead of me. Sasuke replied. You think he's that strong, huh? Kakashi asked. Strong enough to take out the mighty Uchiha? Kakashi elbowed him teasingly. He was well aware of the boy's superiority complex when it came to the academy students. Sasuke scowled at him. If you would teach me some of your jutsu, I wouldn't have to be so worried. He has Jiraiya of the Sannin teaching him. All I have are my clan scrolls, and you know I can't read any of the good ones until I unlock my Sharingan. Kakashi's eyes smiled at the raven-haired boy. He was happy to see the boy he had come to see as a little brother figure had somebody that could challenge him. It was unhealthy to believe that you were above everybody else. Well, I can't wait to watch you two spar. I'm sure you won't have any trouble keeping up with him. Kakashi chuckled. He had watched the academy spars. The only one who could keep up with him was Shino Aburame because of his tactics, but his insect jutsu were a bad match for Sasuke's fire jutsu. Every other student was outmatched in their best category. He was faster than Kiba, stronger than Choji, if only by a little, unlikely to be smarter than the narrate, but it was hard to tell because of Shikamaru's lack of effort, and even better at taijutsu than Hinata, though Kakashi suspected she was holding back. Sasuke knew he was better than them, and he acted like it, hardly paying attention to any of them, except Shino's occasional comment. When Kakashi told him he was going to get to see Naruto, Sasuke had sharpened up. He insisted he needed to go train immediately. The blonde had a profound effect on him. You don't understand, Kakashi, he beat me. Humility and Uchiha didn't often end up in the same sentence, but Kakashi detected a little bit of it in Sasuke's voice. He was surprised. Well, oh mighty Uchiha-sama, Kakashi said playfully, that was 2 years ago. I'm sure you've grown a lot since then. I bet you beat him easily just like the others. Kakashi couldn't help being defensive of Sasuke's skills, he had trained him after all. No new jutsu, just refining the skills he already had. He knew Jiraiya would be taking care of Minato-sensei's son, and that one day he would be a powerhouse, but he hadn't officially met the boy yet, so he was inclined to believe Sasuke was a lot stronger based on rumors. The copy nin had no idea just how outdated those rumors were. Naruto sensed Sasuke before he saw him, along with another vaguely familiar chakra signature. He channeled some chakra to his ears and nose and smelled the two. One smelled like a campfire, probably Sasuke given how often he used fire jutsu and would be practicing with it. The other smelled like a storm and dogs? Naruto didn't have a lot of interaction with household pets in his travels, but it definitely smelled like dogs in addition to the ozone scent that accompanied lightning. He heard them next to crackle of a twig, the rustle of leaves, and the gentle thump of grass being displaced. Then he saw them, and was outraged. No way, bastard. Naruto was shocked to see Sasuke, but not because he didn't know he was coming. I could have sworn I'd be taller than you by now, ya know. Sasuke just smirked his Uchiha smirk, which just frustrated Naruto further. Damn it, I bet you have a bunch of cool new jutsu too, huh? Well, I got news for you, so do I. By the way, who's the dog guy? You didn't bring Kiba with you, did you? Sasuke ignored the question. Kakashi had taken to the trees, probably to test Naruto. He was weird like that. Huh, you think you've got cool new jutsu like your clone, huh? Newsflash, loser, 10 times 0 is still 0. Sasuke said coolly. Kakashi liked to talk trash like this when they sparred, and Sasuke had taken a liking to it. I'll show you who the zero is. Toad oil bullet. Naruto shouted as he ran through hand signs. He spat out the oil at Sasuke, but was rewarded with a slicked-up log for his troubles. TCH, is that all you got, Naruto? You're going to have to be much faster than that to hit me. Sasuke bragged from a tree branch up to his right. Naruto only smiled before popping into smoke. Sasuke was on edge immediately, but couldn't react in time. A metal chain snaked its way around his ankle, and pulled him off of the branch. This time he couldn't substitute in time, and 4 Narutos held him down by his limbs. Ha ha ha, I got you good, huh Sasuke? The blonde cackled. Future Hokage. 1. Bastard Uchiha. 0. TCH. You had that clone made before we even started the spar, that's cheating. Naruto waggled his finger at him. Rule number 1 Sasuke, rule number 1. And what would rule number 1 be, Naruto? A voice asked from behind him. The real him, the one up on a branch a safe distance away from Sasuke. He was so shocked he fell out of the tree. He got up rubbing his backside. Oi, who the hell are you? I recognize your chakra from somewhere. Kakashi seemed interested in this, but didn't question. Why am Kakashi Hitaki, Sasuke's big brother figure? Kakashi said. Best not to introduce himself as his big brother. Wouldn't want to be confused with somebody who was a domestic terrorist. I told you I'm not calling you big bro. A muffled yell came from where Naruto's clones were pushing Sasuke's face into the grass. Now get the loser to release me. His anger was palpable. Naruto, could you be so kind as to release Sasuke? I believe you won the first round. Kakashi had been thoroughly impressed. Naruto had fought and defeated Sasuke like a shinobi, without following the rules or putting himself in danger. Naruto nodded, but didn't relax. He could still smell the dog and ozone, but it was coming from where Sasuke had appeared from. He couldn't smell the man in front of him at all despite channeling chakra to his nose. How come I can't smell you anymore? And why do you smell like dog anyway? Naruto asked. This confused both Sasuke and Kakashi, though for different reasons. I suppose you smell my summons, would you like to meet them? Kakashi asked. His dogs would love to meet his sensei's son. Naruto nodded at this. He liked all the toads. He didn't see why he wouldn't like Kakashi's summons. The Hitaki ran through a familiar set of hand seals after biting his thumb, and placed his palm on the ground. Summoning jutsu. He called out lightly. 8 puffs of smoke came and went, and standing there were 8 different kinds of dogs. Pakun was the one to speak up. Yo, boss. What's the mission? He asked. No mission this time, Pak. Just wanted to introduce you to my new friend, Naruto. Kakashi said with an eye smile. Naruto had not missed the words he used. Friend? He asked. The one-eyed Jonin tilted his head and eyes smiled at Naruto. That is, if it's okay with you, Naruto? Never one to pass up an opportunity to have a friend. Naruto nodded his head vigorously. Kakashi chuckled. Good. Well, these are my summons, they're Ninkin ninja dogs. Pakun is the one who just talked. He has soft paws, you should feel them. Pakun nodded at this and held up a paw. Naruto reached out and felt it. It was really soft, even if this was weird. Kakashi then pointed down the line at the other 7 dogs. That's Bull, Urushi, Shiba, Bisuke, Akino, Yuhei, and Garuko. He finished. Naruto waved at the dogs. It's nice to meet you guys. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, future Hokage Yano. Naruto shouted. The dogs smiled and wagged their tails at him, and he laughed. Would you guys like to meet my summons? They're toads and they're super awesome. Naruto didn't hear a no, so he ran through the hand signs and summoned Gamakichi. Kichi, these are my new friend Kakashi's summons. Naruto listed off their names while pointing them out. Ninkin, this is my friend Gamakichi, he can spit water out, it's awesome. Naruto yelled. Gamakichi demonstrated by spitting water into Naruto's face, no stronger than an average garden hose. The dogs all laughed, and Naruto sent Gamakichi off to play with them. Thanks Kakashi, Kichi's never gotten to play with other summons before. Naruto said excitedly. No problem Naruto. Where's Jiraiya-sama? Kakashi asked. The old perv is out finding us dinner. Naruto replied bluntly. Kakashi's sweat dropped. Alright, I'll go help him. Why don't you and Sasuke catch up? No fighting till Jiraiya or I get back though. Naruto and Sasuke both shouted indignantly that they didn't need babysitters to spar, but eventually relented and agreed after Kakashi rubbed their heads with his knuckles. When it was just the two of them, they plopped down in the clearing, Naruto laying on his back, and Sasuke coolly sitting up against a tree with his elbow propped up on his knee. "So," Naruto said, looking for patterns amongst the leaves of the tree. "Who the hell is this Kakashi guy?" Naruto asked. Sasuke grunted. "Some Jonin who started coming by my house to bother me. He keeps asking me to call him big bro. As if I'd ever do that after what happened with you-know-who." Naruto nodded from his place on the ground. He and Sasuke hadn't discussed it much, but he knew what his brother Itachi had done. If he's a Jonin, he must have cool jutsu. "Did he teach you any?" Naruto asked, steering the conversation away from sadness and hate. "Tch, he's been holding out on me. I've heard rumors that he knows 1,000 jutsu," Sasuke said. Naruto sat up shocked at that. 1,000 jutsu was a lot. More than Jiraiya knew, maybe even more than Hokage Gigi knew. Kakashi must be really strong. "I thought he'd be strong too," Sasuke said, not needing to hear Naruto voice his opinion. "But he acts so aloof all the time, and he's always late for everything. I just can't picture him being deadly," Sasuke said. "Jiraiya says rule number 12 is that appearances are deceiving. If he knows 1,000 jutsu and he's a Jonin, he has to be super strong and awesome, ya know," Naruto said. He seemed to be slightly calmer when it was just him and Sasuke, something the Uchiha was grateful for. "You're just saying that because you like his summons," Sasuke replied, throwing a pebble at the blonde's forehead protector. It was the first time he'd seen him with it on, though he knew he was on the verge of earning it when he'd left the Toad's home. Naruto shrugged. The 10-year-olds sat in a peaceful silence, both feeling more at ease around each other than they had at any other time in the last 2 years. There was an unspoken understanding between them. After about 15 minutes, Kakashi and Jiraiya came walking into the clearing, the former with a deer slung over his shoulder. "Alright Gakis," Jiraiya said, "early dinner first, and then you can spar." "No shot, pervy sage. If we're only gonna be here for a few days, I gotta beat the bastard as many times as I can, ya know," Naruto shouted, once again full of energy. Sasuke grunted in agreement. He too wanted to fight Naruto, on even ground this time, to see where he stood. "Language, Naruto. But I suppose sparring beforehand wouldn't hurt." Jiraiya relented, and they moved about 30 feet about in the clearing, and made the hand sign for a friendly spar. Jiraiya said, "Alright, on my mark. 3, 2, alright, I guess you guys were eager," he said. Both Naruto and Sasuke had taken off at 2, trying to get the upper hand. They started with taijutsu this time, as their teachers often had them do when sparring. Naruto had superior speed and strength, which he had spent a lot of time working on, but Sasuke had much sharper and cleaner form, leading to him having the advantage. Naruto realized this after several exchanges, and leapt back, running and throwing shuriken that he pulled from the seal on the side of his scroll. Sasuke pulled a kunai from his pouch, and blocked all 6 of them, before throwing it at Naruto. The blonde rolled behind a tree, and ran off in 5 different directions when he emerged. Sasuke noticed 4 of them were just running, while the 5th one was watching Sasuke while he moved. That must be the real one, he thought, and gave chase. Pulling another kunai from his pouch, he lunged at Naruto, who just stopped and smiled. The kunai plunged into the boy's shoulder, and he poofed into smoke. Sasuke didn't have a chance to get angry, as he was tackled from behind. Stupid loser blonde, always pulling tricks. Naruto stood with his foot planted on Sasuke's chest, a huge grin on his face. "Gotcha again, Sasuke, that's 2 for me." Sasuke smirked back at him though, and quickly ran through 3 hand signs. "You should have restrained my hands, loser." Lightning release. Paralyzing palm. Sasuke shouted, charging electricity up into his palm, and grabbing Naruto's exposed ankle. The blonde felt the charge shoot up his leg, and his whole body went numb, but hurt at the same time. His muscles gave out as they were no longer in his control, and he fell to the ground. Sasuke quickly pounced on him with a knee on his chest and a blunted kunai at his throat. "That's 1 for me and 0 for you, Naruto. That first one didn't count," Sasuke said coolly. "Oi, fine, you won this one, but get off of me." The Uchiha obliged with a smirk. I thought you said the Cyclops was holding out on you? Naruto asked. Sasuke smiled. He might have given me one scroll for one jutsu. It's basically a D rank though. Hardly worth my time, but easily enough to defeat you, HN. Sasuke grunted. Kakashi smiled. Naruto had been good. He fought like both parents from what he had seen. Unpredictability and brawling like Kushina, but strategic thinking and speed like Minato. He was proud of him, and Sasuke too. Watching them interact reminded him of he and Obito, though they seemed to have a better understanding of each other than Obito had. The boys faced off several more times over the next couple of days. Most of their fights ended in a draw, much to their combined frustration. They each had strengths and weaknesses that the other didn't, and fighting each other brought their weaknesses to the forefront of their intention. By the time they parted ways, Naruto had a drive to increase his proficiency in taijutsu and weapon skills, and Sasuke wanted to increase his speed and strength to a higher level to keep up with Naruto. Sasuke wanted to find a way to cut through Naruto's needle jizo. His weapon skills weren't as valuable if they couldn't cut through his hair. Of course, both boys wanted to increase their jutsu arsenals, though Naruto currently had a more versatile repertoire. Sasuke's were extremely effective, and more offensively oriented. Naruto also desperately wanted to learn jutsu to counter lightning jutsu. Sasuke had told him that was his natural affinity, which left Naruto curious as to what his was. He knew of affinities, but Jiraiya had never specifically focused on the topic, so he didn't know what his was. He was just praying that it wasn't Earth, as he knew it was weak to lightning. Chapter 8. Heritage. 1.5 years later, June, Naruto and Sasuke are 11. He was finally here. As Naruto stood before the village, he felt some apprehension and nervousness. Was it right to come back here? Was it okay for him to be here? Did he truly belong? Uzushiogakure, the home of the Uzumaki clan. The old Uzumaki clan. The new one would be rebuilt in Konoha when Naruto returned in a few months. The village was mostly ruins at this point, and what wasn't in ruin was overrun by plant life. If one were to view the village from the sky, they would notice a certain pattern that the buildings formed. There were no walls in Uzushio. A people of Fuinjutsu and barrier ninjutsu had no need for such crude landmarks or defenses. Naruto walked slowly through the village, taking it all in. Jiraiya was following the boy, but not too closely. Naruto had matured a lot in the time that he had been with Jiraiya, and he felt the boy needed to take on this adventure alone. It was his clan after all, and he would be the head of it soon enough. Amongst the rubble of buildings, Naruto saw plenty of seals and barrier formulas inked onto the ground, all completely out of chakra after decades without a recharge. Whenever he came across one, even if he recognized it, he formed what had become his signature hand seal, and had a shadow clone record the technique in a scroll, before handing it to Jiraiya to keep track of. Master and student continued walking, occasionally recording down seals, before coming to the center of the village. The main tower, where the village leader worked, and the records and jutsu archive would be if it was anything like Konoha. Naruto's curiosity peaked, as did Jiraiya's when they realized the building was essentially untouched. Aside from the emptiness and lack of life in it, the building could have been in use yesterday, and they never would have known. Approaching the doors, Naruto recognized the seal on the door. It was extremely similar to the blood seal that accompanied his Uzumaki scroll that Sarutobi had given him. Jiraiya examined the seal, and the ones that branched off of it. He hummed while he worked. While he was technically a master, he was never able to really get to the point where he used Fuinjutsu in battle the way that Minato and Kushina had, but he had always enjoyed the art, and considered it a hobby. After a minute or two, Jiraiya spoke. I won't be able to go in, Whiskers. Jiraiya used Naruto's least favorite nickname, the one that he had come up with to counter, Pervy Sage. The blood seal extends to a barrier jutsu that seems to draw chakra from the surrounding area. Jiraiya said. He'd never seen a seal that could absorb nature chakra, not even amongst the knowledge of his toad summons. That wasn't important right now though, he would record the seal for Naruto's library so they could study it later. Without permission from whoever made the barrier, or the right passcode, I won't be able to enter. Your Uzumaki blood should let you pass though. Naruto nodded, and bit his finger, swiping the blood across from the seal, and making a hand seal to release it. The black seals lit up gold for a brief second, before dulling down. Nothing bad happened, so Naruto took that as acceptance and pushed the door open. The building really was a lot like the Hokage Tower. They would have been built around the same time, by allies too, so he supposed that made sense. He first headed to the archive room, knowing it would only be up one floor from where he was. There were no seals on the room when he found it, so he pushed on through the door. Nothing. Literally nothing. The room was completely empty, save for a seal that was on the middle of the floor. He recognized the basis of the seal. It was used to destroy documents that fell into the wrong hands. Though this one was much more complicated, he supposed that it was to clean house in the room, but not destroy the room itself. He had been studying Fuinjutsu relentlessly in the past year and a half, though it was extremely slow going. For starters, he had just cleared Jiraiya's calligraphy test so that he could start working with more dangerous seals 3 weeks ago. It was a prerequisite before Jiraiya would let him come here. Second, as much as he had learned to enjoy reading and learning, it was still difficult for him. His attention span was short, and he had trouble focusing on a book for longer than 20 minutes before he found himself rereading lines and becoming mentally fatigued. He had improved this to 45 minutes over the last couple of months, but that still wasn't enough. He had tried using clones, but they had the same attention span as him, so while he could take in more information, it was still slow going. He also had to read a book or scroll several times before he properly learned the information, which was frustrating because a shadow clone would only clone the cover of the book, and any page that it was open to, or that he had memorized. This made memorizing a book slow going, because it would still take him 2 or 3 days to get through once, and 2 or 3 more to actually absorb the info. Reading really just wasn't his thing, as important as he knew it was. He learned much better through trial and error, and feeling things out. Jiraiya had assured him that the more advanced stages of Fuinjutsu were all trial and error, but not before he suggested he give it up. Naruto had been furious at this, and doubled his efforts. He was an Uzumaki, and he would be feared for his Fuinjutsu prowess, or he'd die trying. He'd told Jiraiya that he'd give up ramen before he'd give up Fuinjutsu. That had opened the Sannin's eyes. He was extremely disappointed that the records room was destroyed, though he wasn't surprised. Jiraiya had prepared him for this possibility, but he had been hoping it wouldn't be true. He moved on. The 3rd and 4th floor would be the Jutsu library. He took the winding stairs to the 3rd floor, and entered without trouble. There was nothing in there either, just empty bookshelves. In his anger, he kicked a bookshelf over in his anger. What he saw, or rather didn't see, was quite surprising. No dust anywhere in the room, the very abandoned room. Naruto made the hand seal to create shadow clones, but nothing happened. He tried again, and nothing happened. Then he saw the big sign that read, "No Jutsu," and frowned. It apparently wasn't a suggestion. Naruto exited the room and stood right outside the door. He tried to make a shadow clone, and this time it worked. He made 20 more, and had them fan out through the 3rd floor and the rest of the building, checking everywhere they could for seals. If there was no dust, and nobody here to clean it, then there must be jutsu keeping the building clean, just as there was keeping it protected. When he made it to the 4th floor, he couldn't get into the room. This room would be for Jonin ninja and above. There was a guard station right next to it, so he guessed Jonin were either expected to get cleared to enter, have the jutsu password, or be able to hack the seal. Looking at it, he could guess that if he tampered with it too much, it would destroy the contents of the room. If it hadn't already. He sighed. He wouldn't be able to get in this room for a while, it seemed. He decided to head to the top floor. The office of the cage. The history books had said that only the leaders of the 5 great nations could name their leader a cage. Uzushiogakure, while small, was dangerous enough to name their leader a cage. The Azukage. Jiraiya said their refusal to remove Cage from their village leader's title was likely one of the reasons that they were destroyed. The large wooden double doors were so elegantly carved it looked as if they hadn't been carved at all, but rather formed that way. These doors, too, had a complex seal, though it didn't appear that anything would be destroyed if it was tampered with. It was strange that this door had less security than the Jonin-level Jutsu library. But then again, the most powerful person in the village was usually within this room. He supposed that while the village was still operational, it would have been foolish to try and break in, and likely akin to suicide. Naruto decided it was time to test his newest Fuinjutsu theory, centered around his 9-tailed tenant. He closed his eyes and made the rat seal, focusing on entering his mindscape. After a few seconds, he felt the somewhat familiar pull in the back of his mind, and let it overtake him. Naruto found himself in his mindscape, which was built a lot like an underground facility. It had one long hallway and a giant cavernous room, like a warehouse, that held the caged beast. The remnants that reminded him of a sewer, the pipes that ran along the roof, and the rotten smell were gone. Now it was a more neutral place, and not quite so dark. The water on the floor of the cage room was still there, and Naruto had begun to suspect that this represented the fox's chakra that was constantly being pushed into his system. The deep rumble of the fox's breath told Naruto that he was asleep. "I know you're not asleep, you grumpy old fox, or at least pretending to be. Now get up," he shouted in his most shrill voice. The fox's ears twitched back at it, and he slowly opened an eye. "What do you want, brat?" the mass of chakra grumbled. "I want to try my Fuinjutsu theory, but I need your chakra," the 11-year-old called out. "No, now leave, you insolent flea," the fox replied. Naruto giggled at the fox's insult. They weren't very insulting when it was stuck behind the bars of the seal. "But you know that the more chakra you let me use, the more the seal loosens," Naruto sang to the fox. He knew it wasn't a joking matter, but he also knew that it was the best motivation to get the fox to let him use his chakra. The Nine Tails grumbled. What the boy said was true, though he hated that it was. He didn't want the brat to use the chakra for something so trivial. It should be used to inspire fear in others. He was the most powerful being in the world. His chakra shouldn't be used for cat burglary. "No," was his short response. He closed his open eye, signifying the end of this conversation. "Oh come on. Why do you have to be so grumpy? Is it because you have all those pointy teeth, but no toothbrush? I can get you a toothbrush." Apparently a certain child didn't understand the giant fox's body language. Naruto knew what he was doing though. He didn't get a response, so he carried on. "Now Mr. Fox," Naruto said, knowing it would enrage Kyuubi. He wouldn't have to call him that if he would just tell him his name, though the fox insisted he didn't have a name. "You know I will do the thing if you don't give me what I want," Naruto said. The fox's eye opened back up. He did not want Naruto to do the thing. He also didn't want to give Naruto his chakra, as the brat was disrespectful and hadn't offered him anything in return, except for an unlikely way of escaping. He closed his eye again. Maybe if he fell asleep, the blonde would leave him alone. "Alright, you brought this upon yourself though. Shadow Clone Jutsu," Naruto yelled. 50 copies of himself burst into existence, all with huge grins on their faces. Naruto knew the only thing more annoying to the fox than him talking was a bunch of him talking. "Hey Fox. Oh Mr. Fox. Do you like ramen? Do you have any brothers or sisters? How'd you get to be so big anyway?" 51 different Narutos shouting random questions at the same time appeared to do the trick. "Fine, you insolent little brat. I will gift you a drop of my chakra, and when I get out of here, I'm going to eat you for an appetizer before I eat the villagers of the leaf," the nine-tailed fox yelled. Naruto dispelled his clones with a big smile. "Thank you Mr. Kyuubi, I appreciate your help. I am not helping you, I'm just getting rid of you so I can sleep," the fox replied, pushing a small amount of chakra through the seal. It was much easier than it had been the first time he had done it back when Naruto was 7, though it still took way too much effort to try and make a break for it. "Whatever you say, I appreciate it regardless, thank you," Naruto shouted before fading out of his mindscape. The fox went back to trying to sleep. In all honesty, the 50 clones of Naruto were annoying, but he could sleep through them if need be. What was unbearable was the blonde's chakra when he performed jutsu. He hated how much it reminded him of Kushina's, of the chains that had bound him. More than that though, he hated how much it felt like his creator's. The blonde's chakra was nearly identical to the Sage of Six Paths, and it brought him great pain, and a lot of anger. The human had no business being mentioned in the same thought as the sage, let alone being compared to him. He couldn't help it though, the thoughts appeared despite his best efforts to ignore him. The warmth of the chakra, the memories that accompanied them, it all made him so angry. The brat didn't even know that he was using ninchu subconsciously, and that angered him even more. All in all, it was easier to just give the blonde what he wanted so he would leave. Naruto was right where he had left himself, and he put his hand on the seal of the door, and started channeling the Kyuubi's chakra. If anybody had seen him, they would have noticed his hair lengthen ever so slightly, and his fingernails and canine teeth sharpen ever so slightly. More noticeable would have been the slitted pupils in his still blue eyes. The fox's chakra was incredibly corrosive, something that made Naruto frown. He knew that chakra often reflected a person's feelings as it was inherently and deeply linked to who they were. He could only assume it was the hate the fox had for the world and for humans that made his chakra so volatile. It made him sad that any being could feel that way. Still though, the chakra was eating at and overwhelming the seal on the door, and soon there was nothing left. Naruto pushed the doors open. The setup of the room was eerily reminiscent of the Hokage's office back in Konoha, at least what Naruto could remember of it. Looking around, he noticed there was a pattern on the walls in front of him. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the pattern extended to the floor and ceiling too. Seals. It should have been obvious immediately given where he was, yet he was still surprised. In all his reading he hadn't heard of having an entire room covered in seals. In fact, the largest seal that had been covered was a barrier that was meant to protect large areas like villages. Of course those needed multiple seals working together, but they were no larger than the scroll on Jiraiya's back. He actually recognized some of the seals. One of them was a simple converter. Chakra would run through the seal, and the energy would be converted into light. It didn't appear to be giving any off right now, as it was midday, and there were large windows that kept the room lit. Another seal seemed to be a simple detector seal, which would recognize the amount of light in the room, and whether or not the room was occupied. He would have thought that he wouldn't be able to channel chakra in here either, but he was able to make a few shadow clones to record the seals. As basic as their application, there were still parts of the seals that he didn't recognize, and studying them might reveal something important. When it came to Fuinjutsu, you could never have too much information. Naruto made his way across the room to the desk, his short ponytail bobbing against his upper back as he did so. The desk, much like the doors, was made of intricate wood. In fact, it seemed to be an exact replica of the one in the Hokage's office, save for the Uzumaki symbol carved into the front of it. He ran his hand across the smooth face of the desk as he worked his way around it, not finding a speck of dust. When he made his way behind it, he pushed the chair out of the way. He wouldn't sit in it yet, it was reserved for a shinobi with much more power than what he had. The desk seemed simple enough. A few drawers on either side, and they didn't even seem to be sealed shut. Just to get in the room you'd have to get through several layers of security, and probably whatever Uzushio had that was equivalent to Anbu. Naruto opened the first drawer on the left. An ink jar, brush, and a few blank scrolls. Naruto had plenty of those things himself, so he let them be. The next drawer down had a few kunai and shuriken, though he wasn't sure why they were just sitting there given the village's fuinjutsu abilities. The final drawer on the left side was completely empty, so he moved on to the other side. More of the same in the first two drawers on the right side, disappointingly enough. The last drawer, however, was different. He found familiar storage seal in this one, exactly like the one on his Uzumaki scroll that the Sannin had given him. Reopening the already closed wound that he used to unseal the doors into the building, Naruto let the blood seep for a second before swiping it across the seal while channeling chakra. This time around, it seemed to take an extra few seconds before accepting him with a flash of deep red. A flash of smoke revealed one large scroll, with many more seals running all over it. Naruto knew from one look that he wouldn't be able to open it, so he sealed it within his own storage seal, and stood up. On the wall opposite him, next to the door that he had entered through, he saw two pictures. Given what he knew about Konoha's Hokage office, he figured that these must have been the two Azukage that the village had. He approached the two images, both of which were of long white-haired men. The first one had a pair of very familiar-looking white sword handles sticking up over his shoulders. Naruto held his breath. Had his mother really left him with the weapons of the Shodai Azukage? First Azukage. He suddenly felt a weight on his shoulders. These two men led a village feared enough that it took a combination of 3 great villages to destroy it. Now he was all that was left to live up to that reputation. It was a lot to take in, and a lot that he would have to rebuild. He silently swore that he would surpass both of them. Naruto and Jiraiya were making their way back to Konoha, much slower than the blonde was happy with. As nervous as he was to go back to the village, he was eager to return to his home. He may not have had many friends or any real family, but there were still several people that he was aching to see. Iruka-sensei, Tuchi, Ayame, Hokage Jiji, Kakashi-sensei. He had taught him a thing or two when they met up. Heck, he even wanted to see Sasuke, even if it was just to kick his butt. He was also much different than he had been the last time that he had been there, and he was looking forward to trying to make friends in his class again. He was also looking forward to playing some harmless pranks with his acquired ninja skills. He had just been starting to develop a reputation as a prankster when he first left, and he had a lot of ideas that had gone unused. Now that he could walk on walls, it would be even easier. He frowned. According to Jiraiya, he was to be publicly instated as the heir to the Uzumaki clan. While the clan had not had a large basis in the Leaf, it was well respected. He knew that he wouldn't be able to play pranks on the village at large or the random shopkeepers who treated him poorly. Speaking of which, Jiraiya had mentioned that training with him might be enough to sway some people to think of him as more than the Biju that was sealed within him. The people of the village had a great deal of respect for the Sannin, and as Jiraiya was the only one that was still, somewhat, within the village, he currently held the most respect. Still, others would lose all respect for the Toad Sage, thinking that he had sided with the nine-tailed fox that had nearly destroyed the village. Naruto had felt bad about that, but Jiraiya didn't seem to care too much. Still, he was grateful that the Sannin had taken him from the village and given him the means to take care of himself, more psychologically than physically. Naruto shook his head at his thoughts. The villages really didn't know any better, and he supposed that if he were in their spot, he probably wouldn't like himself all that much either. Still, a part of him resented them for not seeing that he was just a child struggling to find his way in life. Cheer up, kid. I told you, the villagers will come to realize soon enough. Sometimes Naruto wondered if Jiraiya could read minds. He had heard of a clan in Konoha that could do that. Maybe the Toad Sage was secretly a part of them? I know, I'm just nervous about going back. Before I came with you, I was naive to the treatment I was receiving. Now I'm not so sure how I'll take it, and part of me is scared that I'll begin to resent the village because of it. Naruto said. Jiraiya internally whistled. The boy had come a long way when it came to his dialect. Not that he showed it often, he was still the loud knucklehead that played pranks and worshipped ramen, but now he was capable of speaking in a respectable manner. Knowing you, you might get upset, but you won't truly resent the village. You have too much kindness in your heart. Just like your parents. Jiraiya's eyes glazed for a split second while he thought of the two, and he came to a decision. Sarutobi hadn't explicitly given him permission to tell Naruto this information, so technically he was to be sentenced to death for revealing it. His sensei wouldn't have him killed for it though, he was too valuable to the village. At least he thought he was. Speaking of which, when you're revealed as the Uzumaki clan heir, there will be some complications. Jiraiya said. Naruto's head tilted like a confused dog. It was still adorable even though he'd lost a little bit of the roundness in his face. There was only one Uzumaki left in the village 12 years ago. Many of the Jonin that are Kakashi's age and older will remember her, as will all of the clan heads. Many of these people were aware of her relationship with your father, though it was technically in secret. Jiraiya explained. Naruto's deductive skills had grown greatly as Jiraiya challenged them throughout their time together, so it only took him a few seconds to reach his conclusion. They'll know who my dad was? He questioned. He had often questioned Jiraiya, but he always got the same response. That it was too dangerous for him to know. Correct. He had picked up quite the reputation, and was well known within the village. The clan heads and the smarter Jonin will make the connection instantly, so I think it's time I tell you. Jiraiya explained. If he hadn't seemed so serious, Naruto would have thought he was messing with him. I cannot stress enough how serious this situation is. I believe you have matured enough to know, but you are not yet powerful enough to have it openly revealed. If the shinobi world finds out, you will be targeted. You have to be able to dispose of Jonin-level threats, or at least be able to escape them before we can reveal it. Jiraiya said. His voice was sharp and sterner than Naruto had ever heard it, even sterner than the time he had tried to make an explosive note without Jiraiya's permission, and burnt his eyebrows off. I would like to hold this off until you turn Jonin yourself, but I'm afraid too many of the shinobi will figure it out, and from there it will inevitably leak out. Jiraiya said. Reaching into his vest, he withdrew a small square from his inner pocket. A photograph. Naruto found it strange that it wasn't something he kept sealed away, as Jiraiya didn't carry many things on his person besides his large scroll and his notebook for research. Jiraiya looked at the photo, tears forming in his eyes. It had been years since he'd looked at the photo, but he always kept it in his pocket over his heart. He had considered the man in it a son, though he was technically only his sensei. He slowly handed the photo over to Naruto, as a lone tear slid slowly down his left cheek. He was one of a kind, kid. He was like the son I never had. Jiraiya said so quietly that Naruto had to channel chakra to his ears to hear. Naruto took the photo and looked at it. His heart was pounding in his ears, and his hands were shaking. The first thing that he noticed was the vibrant red hair of his mother. His pregnant mother. And standing next to her, huge grin on his face, and hand on her belly was. "This is the Yondaime," Naruto said in shock. Jiraiya nodded. "My father was the fourth Hokage?" Jiraiya nodded again, not knowing what to say. "I this know," Naruto said. He bit his lip drawing blood, but the photograph didn't change. He built up his chakra as much as he could, and released it violently, the grass around him shifting slightly. "No change. This can't be real, I can't be his son," he said out of breath. "It's true," was all Jiraiya could respond with. He knew Naruto would be mad at him, and he was waiting for the eventual explosion. It never came. Silent tears streamed down Naruto's face. His vision was so blurry he couldn't see the photo in his hands anymore, but he'd never be able to unsee it. He was the son of the fourth Hokage. The son of his hero, and one of the most feared shinobi of all time. When he finally regained his composure, after nearly a full minute, he spoke. "You gotta be fucking kidding me, pervy sage." He choked out, snot streaming out of his nose as he did so. Jiraiya didn't know what to say. Naruto was as unpredictable as ever. Seeing that he wasn't going to say anything, Naruto elaborated. "I'm the son of two of the most badass ninja ever." Naruto half-asked half-stated. "They died because of me," he said after a moment of realization. Jiraiya had told him that his mother was the previous Jinchuriki, and that she had died helping the fourth seal the fox away. "No Gaki, they died for you. It wasn't your fault the fox escaped the seal, and it wasn't your fault that you were suited to be a host, better than anybody else in the village," Jiraiya said firmly. He didn't want to leave any doubt in Naruto's mind. "They loved you more than anything, even before you were born. You should have seen how excited the two of them were when they found out." Jiraiya explained. "I had parents who loved me?" Naruto asked rhetorically. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. First he thought that he had been abandoned. Then he found out he had a mother who loved him, but part of him still thought that his father had abandoned him, and that's why nobody would tell him about it. But they had both loved him, both sacrificed their lives so that he and the village could live on. In that moment he gained another burden. For some reason though, this one didn't add to the weight on his shoulders, it lifted it a little bit. He had lofty goals, and his parents had done everything they could to help him achieve it. Now it was up to him. "Did my father leave me anything?" Naruto asked, wanting to have a piece of his father just as he did of his mother. Jiraiya nodded. "Back in the village there's some things." His notes on jutsu and seals, including his most signature one. "A few of his kunai are there, and if my memory is correct, one of his cloaks, though it's probably too big for you," he said. Naruto nodded back. That was more than he was expecting. Much more. The Yondaime, his father, was most known for his use of the flying Raijin, the jutsu that gave him the flee on sight order. He assumed it would be impossibly difficult for him to learn, as there were only two known wielders of it in Konoha's history, both of them being Hokage. If there was one thing he enjoyed though, it was the thought of doing something impossible. "Alright," Naruto said, face determined and stoic, "let's get to work then." Jiraiya just shook his head. "Whiskers, don't you think you should take some time to process this?" Jiraiya asked. "It's kind of a big deal, and you were in shock at least for a second. Maybe you should just rest for the rest of the night?" "Pervy sage, both my parents died to save the village. Now you're telling me that I'll have Jonin-level threats after me because of who they were. It would be a disservice to them to die from one of their enemies after all that they sacrificed for me. I have to get strong enough to survive, and I have to do it fast if what you said about Leaf Shinobi figuring it out is true," Naruto explained seriously. "Plus, Kage don't just grow on trees, and Old Man Third ain't getting any younger," he finished. Jiraiya was once again given a warm feeling by his student's almost palpable determination. Jiraiya pondered the blonde's words. He was honestly above beginner genin levels already, and was seriously approaching chunin level with his ninjutsu. His knowledge was expanding rapidly with clones, and he was even getting some experience as Jiraiya had been giving him mock missions as a part of his training. The blonde's fuinjutsu was higher than 90% of the village so far, only being topped by the Sealing Corps, some of the Yondaime's closest allies, and perhaps the Hyuga clan elders, who needed a baseline knowledge to be able to perform the caged bird seal. Still, while fast enough to outdo most genin, he would likely be taken care of fairly easily by any chunin that had already reached maturity. His strength was good, really good for someone so young, but still not enough to overtake most chunin. His body just wasn't developed enough to take on older opponents physically yet. His chakra control was basically to the point where he could start channeling it internally to enchanted movements though, and that could make up a lot of ground. Alright Gaki, we can start taking your training seriously. Naruto smiled at Jiraiya's response. But you have to understand how hard it'll be. If we're gonna do this, it'll be painful, you will break bones. If you're not on your game, you could potentially take a fatal wound if a kunai slips by your guard. It won't be a game anymore. You have to be sure that you're ready. Jiraiya explained sharply. He preferred his carefully crafted aloof attitude, but sometimes it was necessary to get serious. Naruto gulped at his sensei's declaration. His eyes never softened though, and his face never lost its steel. I have to be ready, there is no other option, Jiraiya-sensei. There are too many people counting on me. Jiraiya knew he didn't just mean the people he loved. The dumb blonde truly believed with all his heart that he needed to protect the village that shunned him. Jiraiya had never been more proud. Alright, Naruto, we have about 3 months until you start the academy. I will devote my full attention to you until then. No meeting with contacts, no spying, no research, just you. Jiraiya said, slightly shocking Naruto. Once we get to the village and you enroll in the academy, I'll have to pass a majority of your training off, because I'll have to get back on the road, but until then I'm only focused on you. I doubt you'll still like me when we're done though. Naruto grinned like the knucklehead he was. Who says I even like you now, old man? He said cheekily. The toad sage cracked his knuckles with a smile, and Naruto knew enough to know that he needed to run. And fast. Chapter 9. The Academy. 3 months later, end of August, Naruto is 11, Sasuke just turned 12. If there was one thing that Naruto knew for sure, it was that school was boring. 3 days into the academy and he already wanted to get back on the road. No amount of ramen was worth enduring this torture. All Iruka-sensei talked about was village rules this, history that, blah blah blah. He had promised Jiraiya he would try his best, but he wasn't sure he would survive. Why did pervy sage have to go back on the road anyway? It's not like he actually does anything besides peep on women and drink too much sake. Naruto laid his head down on the desk and drifted off to sleep. Naruto, wake up, Iruka shouted. Naruto startled awake, looking surprised, made the cross seal, and smacked his head back down on the desk as a shadow clone sprung to life in the empty seat next to him. Only to smack his head down to fall asleep too, though the force popped him. Iruka put his hand to his face. The blonde may be his favorite, and he seems to have learned quite a bit with Jiraiya, but he was the worst student he'd ever had. By far. Iruka lazily flung a piece of chalk at the boy, aiming to hit the crown of his head and wake him up. Naruto had other ideas, and snapped up out of his fake sleep, sped through hand signs, and suddenly his hair hardened and wrapped around him. The chalk shattered against the newly erected shield. Iruka sighed, at least he had good reactions. Naruto on the other hand was smirking very smugly at his sensei, well aware of the effect he had. He didn't lay back down though, knowing that he'd just get in trouble again. Instead he got out a scroll to work on some fuinjutsu. He was currently trying to separate the Hiraishin formula down to individual pieces so he could learn them, and then put them back together to make his own, albeit different, formula. His father's notes were very clear that using pre-existing markers was more difficult than coming up with your own. While Iruka-sensei droned on about proper customs while visiting a foreign village, Naruto was working on making a mark that he could sense. He'd already succeeded in this, but the range was limited to his sensing abilities, which weren't that far. While Jiraiya had discovered that he was a natural sensor, and had the chakra to be molding and sensing all the time. His range with the ability wouldn't even cover the whole village unless he sat down to meditate. He needed the mark to be easier to feel, and easier to distinguish from other stuff. While he worked, Sasuke sat to his other side, cycling his Sharingan in and out, practicing on doing it quicker and quicker, and then on holding it longer and longer without running out of chakra. He had eventually discovered that all he needed to do was channel chakra to his eyes to activate it. It seemed so simple that he never would have even thought of it if it weren't for Naruto. Kakashi, he still wasn't calling him Big Bro, had mentioned that Naruto seemed to hone his senses by channeling chakra to different parts of his body, like nose, ears, etc. Sasuke, never one to like being in second, had immediately tried it. He could smell a little better if he channeled some to his nose, hear better if he channeled to his ears, but when he sent some chakra to his eyes, it was different. It was like the whole world changed. Time and people's movements seemed to slow down, and he could see Kakashi's chakra flow. When Kakashi made a facial expression in reaction to him doing this, he actually saw it, could read the movements of the muscles under his mask and saw he was surprised. He had never seen Kakashi surprised before. Actually, he'd never seen Kakashi do anything but that dumb eye smile. Sasuke knew from clan scrolls and from what he'd heard from his relatives that this is what the Sharingan was supposedly like, so he ran to the nearest mirror to confirm if it was true. Red eyes stared back at him spinning lazily, and suddenly he wasn't in Kakashi's apartment anymore. He was in the street outside the Uchiha district, tears streaming down his face, staring at his brother, pleading with him to tell him that it was all a lie, a nightmare, just a bad dream. He'd even take a genjutsu, he just didn't want it to be real. He wanted Itachi to tell him that his family wasn't dead, and that his brother hadn't killed them all. As fast as it started, it was over, and he felt Kakashi's hand on his shoulder, steadying him. In the almost 2 years since that time, he had developed a second tomo in his left eye, giving him 2 in both. He wanted to undergo the grueling training to develop a third in each, but Kakashi told him he wouldn't help until he was at least a genin. Sasuke's first thought had been that Kakashi was trying to hold him back, but he was the only one in the village who had bothered to check on him and teach him some shinobi arts. Sure, the rest of the village loved him, their precious loyal Uchiha, the last one left with the special eyes. But they didn't even know him, not really. Their infatuation with his Sharingan only reminded him of the fact that there used to be a whole clan of them. Now they were dead, all but 2. He refused to use his Sharingan out in public walking around, he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing it. Sasuke was brought out of his brooding by Ichiraku saying that it was time for the first spar. Both he and the no longer sleeping blonde next to him both grinned. Sasuke of course had spent the last 4 years, never losing a spar at the academy. In fact, the only 2 people that he had lost a spar to were Kakashi, who refused to even use his Sharingan on him, and Naruto. Naruto had spent the last 3 months getting crushed by Jiraiya day in and day out, and he was anxious to fight somebody his own age and actually have a chance to win. When they got outside to the sparring ground, Ichiraku-sensei explained that it would be taijutsu only, which suited both boys just fine. Sasuke was hoping to fight Naruto, but he ended up fighting Choji instead. The fight lasted 3 exchanges. Sasuke rushed and threw a slow punch, Choji caught it, and Sasuke used him as leverage to leap off the ground and kick his larger opponent in the stomach with both feet, sending him sprawling out of the ring. He never even activated his Sharingan. All the girls cheered when Sasuke was declared the winner. He ignored them and returned to his spot next to Naruto. A few fights later, and it was Naruto's turn, and he would be fighting Kiba. Unlike when Sasuke had fought, everybody was extremely quiet when Naruto stepped into the ring. The other students so far had been cordial to the blonde, though he hadn't really made any other friends besides Sasuke, or the occasional quip with Shikamaru and Kiba. Ichiraku started the match, and Kiba immediately began boasting how he was gonna kick Naruto's ass since he had been the dead last several years ago. Before he could continue, Naruto seemed to blur and disappear. The last thing Kiba remembered about the fight was a pressure on the back of his neck, and then everything went dark. He awoke to Naruto waving his hand in front of his face, trying to wake him up. He was a little bit out of it, but let Naruto help him up anyway. "Sorry about that, Kiba. I thought you would be able to keep up with my speed. Sasuke told me you were fast, ya know." Naruto said once Kiba had regained his bearings. Yeah, it was just a lucky shot, I'll get you next time. Kiba replied, though he was upset that somebody wearing wooden sandals had beaten him. Akamaru yipped his agreement from the sidelines where Kiba had left him. Sasuke knew Naruto was fast, they'd been training together the last couple of days, but they hadn't outright sparred, so he didn't know exactly how fast he was. If it hadn't been for the Sharingan, he suspected that he would have had trouble keeping up with the blonde's movements. Those that had been paying close attention in the class, mostly the boys, and a certain Hyuga heiress, had seen little more than a yellow blur, and then Kiba had dropped with Naruto standing right behind him. They were all shocked, they had never seen anybody their age move that fast. Not even Sasuke. The year went on like this. Naruto would surprise everybody with just how good he was at the shinobi arts. He even demonstrated a clone jutsu that he claimed he had invented, though the kunai didn't really do anything when the clone stopped working, they just dropped. This was all compounded by the fact that he rarely paid attention to anything in the classroom, except the one unit on fuinjutsu, where he had made several corrections to Iruka's boring lecture. He also had a tendency to start fires within the classroom, and they always happened to be on test day. These fires always somehow managed to light his test on fire and burn it to ashes before anybody knew what was going on. Iruka didn't know if he was using a fire jutsu, or just some matches, but it was impressive that he hadn't been caught yet. About 1 month into the academy year, it was officially made public that Naruto was the heir to the Uzumaki clan. The clan had never had a large presence within Konoha to begin with. There were never more than 10 or 11 members within the village at once, most permanent, some temporary. Their relationship with the Senju, however, had given them a good amount of prestige within the village, especially to the older generation who could remember their fighting prowess. Because of the lack of members in the village, and how long it had been since the last one, there wasn't a lot left for Naruto to take over. There was a decent amount of money, nothing like the Hyuga clan, or any of the other prominent clans in the village had, but enough that Naruto wouldn't ever have to take a mission if he didn't want to. He had the rights to a fuinjutsu shop that was closed, and without anybody to run it had lost their physical shop. There was, however, a stockpile of merchandise. Brushes, inkwells, blank scrolls, beginner guides, everything a ninja would need to get the basics of fuinjutsu down. There were also more expensive items, like a few weapons and pieces of armor with seals on them. There was even a stockpile of basic kunai and shuriken that were sold alongside the more prominent fuinjutsu stuff items so shoppers wouldn't have to go to 2 stores for the basics. Most of this stuff wouldn't last Naruto more than a year, but it was a good start, and made it so that he didn't have to go to the shops very often, which he was grateful for. Everything else that had been left to him had already been sent to him in the scroll the Hokage gave him. The most important part of Naruto becoming the heir to a clan was the status the being a member gave him. Konoha loved its clan and special abilities, hence why they loved Sasuke so much. The council was also made up almost entirely of clan heads, save for Sarutobi's advisors and a few civilians. Now Naruto would join them shortly when he earned a promotion to Chunin. The council didn't decide a whole lot within the village, but they were allowed to input their advice to the Hokage on important decisions. They were also allowed to rule on smaller things that didn't affect Konoha's military aspects, such as shop regulation, taxes, zoning issues and a few minor things. Because of this, the clans tended to favor themselves. This meant that Naruto now got a discount on anything he tried to purchase for his clan, and was given access to purchase certain lands that could only be bought by clans. He could also barter and trade with other villages as a separate entity from Konoha, which could gain him special deals on trade. The political influence the boy would be able to wield would be astounding, and extremely important for becoming Hokage. While Naruto's new status wasn't announced, anybody could find out in the archives, and many shinobi would see the order as it made its way through the proper channels. Because of this, word had found its way to Ino Yamanaka. That was essentially as good as announcing it to the whole village. All of a sudden, the girls in class were starting to treat Naruto the way that they were treating Sasuke. Of course, some of the civilian children still seemed to be afraid of Naruto and would ignore him at all costs, but it was about 50-50 now. Having not been in the village the last 4 years, meant that many parents hadn't bothered to tell their children to avoid him. Naruto wasn't really a fan of the fangirls and their ridiculous actions. Jiraiya had successfully impressed upon him how dangerous the life of a ninja was. While he still liked to have fun, he had taken him seriously. These soon-to-be kunoichi, however, didn't seem to understand that. It was time to change that. Naruto was living in an apartment, as he wasn't allowed to move into his parents' house until his father was declassified. Because of this, he invited his class to a training ground that he had the Hokage reserved for him. It was one of the hospital's training grounds, and because of that it was safe. It was away from the more dangerous ones, and no traps were allowed. It was meant for newly minted genin to meet with their jonin instructors, and also for ninja that were rehabilitating injuries. There was no way that an outside influence could harm any of the students, which was good, because a decent amount of them were pitiful at best. 25 students showed up, and Naruto was sure that was because he had told them all Sasuke was going to be there, and wanted them there. That was only stretching the truth slightly. Sasuke didn't really like most people, but if it would make them stronger, and possibly get the fangirls to leave him alone, then he wouldn't mind it too much. Naruto had seen the fear in the eyes of the two classmates that didn't come show up. Despite his best effort to smile warmly and sound kind, he could tell that they weren't going to come. He guessed that their parents had been affected greatly by the Nine Tails attack. Though he knew that it couldn't be helped, it still frustrated him. Why couldn't they see past what they'd been told? Surely his actions, besides the occasional test catching on fire, didn't warrant being terrified of him. When everybody had gathered, Naruto suggested they play some games. They started with tag, which of course the boys dominated. They moved on to cops and robbers, and a few other games that didn't last long. They were still young enough to play and have fun, but they were getting to the point where they thought that they were too grown up for games. Luckily the catered lunch arrived just as people seemed to be losing interest. Coming around the corner carrying stacks of ramen bowls were Teuchi, Ayame, and 4 shadow clones of Naruto. Everybody seemed very happy to be getting free lunch, though not as excited as Naruto to be getting ramen. They all sat around in the grass and chowed down on the ramen. It was Ino who asked the question that he had been waiting for. "Naruto, why don't we play ninja next?" she asked expectantly. She was hoping to score some points with him. The blonde set his finished bowl in a stack with the other 3. His face became serious, and his presence became known. All the other academy students looked up at him, except for Sasuke, who already knew what was coming. "Because it's not a game, Ino," he said calmly but firmly. This had been the reason for inviting them all, especially the girls. He would have brought it up regardless, Ino just happened to get the wheels turning. "What do you mean?" It was Sakura who asked the question this time. She was curious and her thirst for knowledge was always high. She couldn't leave an unknown like that out there. "Being a ninja isn't a game. You don't play it," he explained. "Ninja fight for and lose their lives every day. It's a part of their way of life, and I think that's something everybody here needs to learn." All of the girls, and many of the boys had their mouths open in surprise at this. They thought that they had seen Naruto get serious before during some of the skill lessons and obstacle courses, but that had just been him focusing. Now they say a different side of him. It was both serious and calm, yet there was a sadness there too. Naruto shot Sasuke, who was now looking at him, an apologetic look before continuing. "Sasuke and I are both from near-extinct clans, extremely skilled clans, who were the best at what they did. Yet our relatives and ancestors were completely wiped out," Naruto said. Some of his classmates didn't seem like they were ready to hear this, but he had already decided that they needed to hear this. He'd rather they be shell-shocked and unsure than ignorant. He didn't want them to die young, and the best way he could protect them was to inform them. One of the lessons that Jiraiya had imparted on him was that shinobi, and the Hokage especially, had to make hard decisions that would upset people for the good of the village. This would have to be first if he wanted to become Hokage. Sasuke looked at him neutrally, not showing a single emotion on his face. His eyes betrayed him though, as they were shining red as Naruto looked into them. Naruto hadn't told him that he would bring that up, but he hadn't said he wouldn't either. "If you're not ready, you will die. If you get surprised, you will die. If you're not strong enough, if you're a split second too slow, you will die. Worse than anything that I just said, if you're not good enough, your comrades could die. You could be the reason that anybody here dies if you don't take it seriously. Look around and see if you're okay with being the reason somebody here loses their life. We in the Leaf value our comrades above the mission. You can complete a mission and lose a comrade, so you have to be good enough to complete the mission and protect your comrades, protect each other. He made eye contact with every classmate as he spoke, trying to impart his urgency on them. Each of his classmates felt it. They didn't know what it was, but they felt it. They could feel that Naruto was telling the truth, and that he was right. Some of them didn't like it, some of them didn't understand it, a few looked like they were going to cry. He marched on. Sasuke and I couldn't save our clans. He was too young, and I wasn't even alive when the last of mine died. He paused, thinking about his next words carefully. They were the most important. We are strong though, because we understand that loss. It's not his eyes that make him special. He was kicking everybody's butt before he unlocked them. And it's not my clan that makes me special. I was the dead last not even a few years ago. We have become strong, at least for academy students, because we understand. We know that you can lose your loved ones in a second, and we're determined to never let that happen. Both of us would protect any of you with our lives out on a mission. It's the reason I fight. Naruto said. There was a long pause, 1 minute, 2 minutes. Surprisingly enough, it was Sasuke who spoke first. He's right. Most of you don't understand what it's like. Sasuke said quietly. The hidden words in the sentence made it through though. They didn't understand what it was like to lose everybody, and to not be strong enough to do anything about it. Sasuke, perhaps a demonstration would help the words sink in? The blonde asked. The raven-haired Uchiha just nodded. When everybody was off to one side of the training ground, a safe distance away from the spar, they began. They were a complete blur to most of the students, Naruto having the speed advantage, threw the first punch, using the Uzumaki style that he had painfully learned the forms for. It was generally designed to get opponents off balance so a seal or chain could be applied easier in order to immobilize them. The style was generally balanced, and let opponents make mistakes, but Naruto knew Sasuke was unlikely to make one, and he preferred to be the aggressor anyway. Despite his speed advantage, Naruto couldn't land anything on Sasuke due to the latter's whirling Sharingan. But Sasuke was having trouble getting a counterattack in due to the sheer speed of the blonde. Sasuke knew that they could keep going like this forever, and Naruto would win out because of his stamina, so he broke their taijutsu battle by leaping back from the blonde. Naruto smiled knowing what was coming, so he himself leapt back, giving the two a large gap between them. They both ran through hand signs simultaneously. Fire release, great fireball jutsu, water release, gunshot. They shouted simultaneously. The name of the technique didn't necessarily have to be said, but it helped focus, and the two wanted to emphasize their abilities, and maybe show off a little. Sasuke's fireball was larger than Naruto's mass of water, but Naruto had the affinity advantage, so the two jutsu collided and created a large amount of steam. Their classmates looked on in awe. Some had seen some of their older siblings, cousins, or parents do things like this, but they were all 15 or older at least. Others had seen random ninja perform this way, but didn't know anybody who could. A few had never really seen anything like it, and only heard of things like this. When the steam cleared enough that Naruto could see Sasuke, Sasuke could see 4 Narutos, and he was no longer naive enough to believe that there weren't more than that. One Naruto was charging at Sasuke with a sword in hand. Another threw kunai and formed hand seals, with the one next to him forming his own seals. The last Naruto just stood there, holding his hands in a ram seal. Sasuke was seeing this slowly, and processing this quickly. He heard Naruto say the technique names, shouting, Kunai Shadow Clone Jutsu. And Wind Release. Gale Palm. Sasuke cursed, because of the steam he hadn't been able to see the first hand seal on either technique, and thus wouldn't be able to copy it. He dodged the sword of the first clone, and spun him around to take the brunt of the wind-aided kunai, Sharingan spinning to ensure he didn't get hit. The two Narutos who had made the combo technique had dispelled upon using their jutsu, leaving just one, visible, Naruto left. Sasuke wasn't worried about him, as he could see him, so he instead tried to fine-tune his senses to find the inevitably hidden Naruto. His distraction was costly, and he felt the chain wrap begin to snake his way up his legs before he saw it. Sasuke was confused. He'd been wrapped up by a chain before, but that one had been cold and silver. This chain was glowing gold and warm, and it looked like it was made out of chakra, and it was moving as if it were alive. The chain was beginning to wrap itself around his torso, and he could feel his chakra being suppressed. As he began to fall over due to the chain's influence on him, He quickly grabbed several shuriken before it could secure his arms, and flung them at Naruto. The blonde had been donning his concentration face, and cursed and flung himself out of the way, losing the focus on his technique. The chain disappeared from Sasuke, but his red eyes had spotted the same gold glow coming out of Naruto's foot when he dove out of the way. Did the chain come from his body? The two reset themselves, eyeing each other up. This time it was Sasuke who attacked first, beginning a taijutsu bout. This time though, Naruto began to use a different style that appeared to focus on speed and evasion. The Uchiha grew angry as he couldn't land a blow on his friend, and pressed harder. After 20 straight seconds of dodging, the blonde finally made a mistake, and Sasuke punished him with a hard roundhouse kick to the head. Hard enough to pop the clone. Sasuke was furious that he'd been tricked yet again by Naruto's clones. It was quiet for a whole second, before an explosion of dirt came from just in front of Sasuke, followed by a blonde head of hair. Sasuke leaned back, avoiding a potential fist to the face, but Naruto was also carrying a sword, and was swinging it around at Sasuke's neck. There were gasps from the sidelines as he did so, the other students thinking that Naruto was going to try and kill Sasuke. Both Uchiha and Uzumaki knew that Naruto would stop the sword in time, but Sasuke didn't intend to let it get that far. Naruto had locked eyes with him, and that was all it took to put him in a basic Sharingan genjutsu. It only took the blonde a second to realize what had happened and break the genjutsu, but when he did, he felt the cold metal of a kunai pressed against his neck. Damn it, I thought I had you. If Earth release. Hiding like a mole jutsu wasn't so difficult for me to do, I would have had you. Naruto said. Sasuke moved the kunai to the back of his neck and nicked him with it, drawing blood. Ow, you bastard, what was that for? Naruto shouted. Had to be sure you weren't a clone, was Sasuke's short reply. Naruto was pissed, more so that he had lost than anything, but he couldn't fault the Uchiha's logic. Then Naruto remembered why they had sparred in the first place. He'd lost himself in the adrenaline of a good fight, and forgotten his purpose. He turned to the rest of the class. See what levels you can reach when you take being a shinobi seriously and train hard. Do any of you think you could have kept up with us? Naruto asked. Not even Kiba said a word, despite the fact that he was always the most boisterous. I thought so. That was just a spar too. Neither of us were going completely all out because we didn't want to hurt each other, otherwise I would have kicked Sasuke's ass. See, he agrees. Some of the light and playfulness was returning to Naruto. He didn't like acting all serious like that, but as far as he was concerned, his friends' lives were on the line. It surprised him a little bit at how easily he had considered these people his friends. Most of them were just there because of Sasuke or because he was a clan heir. It didn't really bother him though, he knew the alternative was that they didn't come at all, and he enjoyed being around them anyway. I know some of you have clan techniques and training that you do, but if any of you want help taking this more seriously, come to Sasuke or I promise he doesn't bite if you approach him about training and not about how cool he is. Naruto said. Naruto was extremely pleased to see how serious his classmates seemed to take their warning demonstration, and he even had a few talk with him after everybody started to leave. The most surprising was Sakura, as she was Sasuke's biggest fan. Naruto, do you think that maybe you could help me? Sakura asked. Sure Sakura, but why aren't you asking Sasuke? I know he's your favorite. He replied. I don't want him to see. I can't do any of that stuff you guys were doing. I could barely even see you guys. I never knew that ninja could do all that, but I don't want Sasuke to think I'm weak because I can't. She said, eyes planted firmly on her feet. Naruto put a hand on her shoulder. Of course I can Sakura, Naruto said reassuringly, but it's going to take a lot of work, and you'll probably have to quit that diet you keep saying you're on or you'll never survive, ya know. Whatever it takes. I don't want to look weak to Sasuke-kun, Sakura said firmly. She had raised her head to say it, and Naruto could see the determination in her eyes. She probably still didn't understand. He'd never seen her do any more than the basic academy fitness test exercises, and those were easier than her warm-up. Still, he wouldn't turn her down for being from a civilian family and not knowing any better. Alrighty, Naruto cheered, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. We can meet in front of the academy. Sakura blanched at that. She was really hoping a different Naruto would jump out of the ground and yell, psych, but it never happened. What had she gotten herself into? Sarutobi looked into the crystal ball in the Hokage office, absolutely beaming with pride at Naruto. It might have been a little harsher than some of them were ready for, but it would soften the blow coming from somebody their age. He truly was an inheritor of the will of fire, perhaps the strongest since Hashirama himself. By the time graduation rolled around, almost everybody in the class had grown immensely. All 24 students passed easily, and Iruka was sure that this was the best class the academy had had in a long time. He had a sneaking suspicion that a certain blonde had something to do with it, as he'd seen him working with some of the other students on their shinobi arts. Every single student had improved more than he had ever seen from graduation year students, at least on average. Strangely enough, despite their already large gap, Naruto and Sasuke were the two who improved the most, both getting faster and stronger, while sharpening up their current skills. Iruka had been sparring with Naruto the first month or two just to help him out and spend some time with him. He had to claim he was too busy too and stop because he was afraid that Naruto would soon be able to beat him, at least sometimes. The kid was seriously good, and so unpredictable. Iruka had never been more proud. Naruto was extremely happy with his comrades' progress, even if 3 of them had quit before graduation. It was better that they faced the music now and not make it through, than die as a genin on their first real mission later because they couldn't handle it. Unsurprisingly, the 3 who had quit were the 2 civilian boys who never came to his class meeting, and 1 civilian girl who realized that she wasn't cut out for this world. Sakura had made the biggest jump out of all of them. She had near-perfect chakra control and some natural strength to go with her big brain. Naruto had helped her work mostly on the physical aspects of being a ninja. Going on runs, doing strength exercises, and practicing throwing kunai and shuriken on the run, more like it would be in a real fight. He also taught her tree walking and water walking, although taught is a bit of a stretch. It took her less than an hour and a half to learn both, and most of that time had been spent finding a source of water to walk on. She was getting better at using the academy taijutsu style too, and was beginning to modify it to fit her a little better. She had even learned a genjutsu, although despite her chakra control, she didn't seem to like them that much. Hinata too had made great strides, although Naruto already thought she was pretty awesome, definitely better than all of the other girls. She was becoming much more aggressive in her fights, not afraid to do a little bit of temporary damage to her classmates. Naruto insisted that she use chakra against him when they sparred, because he claimed it was awesome and helpful. Ya no, whenever she struck him and his arm would go numb. He also suspected that she might be working with Sasuke a little bit, though he had no proof, and the Uchiha only grunted at him when he asked. The biggest surprise was probably Shikamaru. Nobody really knew if he actually was getting better because he never actually did anything before Naruto's speech, but he was actively participating, and he was actually quite good. His physical side of things needed work, but when he tried in a spar with ninjutsu, he was extremely hard to beat. Ino, Choji, Kiba, Shino, all went to their clans and requested more or harder training. Ino making the greatest leap of the 4, learning her clan's taijutsu style, and Shino making the smallest, as he had already been taking it seriously as it was just logical to do so. Naruto elected to put his black headband around his waist as he had seen other shinobi of the village do it, and he thought the toads might be upset if he didn't wear their forehead on his head. Plus they had accepted him first, and Naruto was nothing if not loyal. He was extremely excited to find out what team he would be placed on, and who his sensei and teammates would be. He knew Hokage Jiji's son and Kakashi were supposed to be Jonin sensei this time around, and he was hoping to get either of them since he didn't know any others and they were both strong. Chapter 10. Team 7. Kakashi Hitaki reached the Hokage Tower 1 minute before his scheduled meeting with Hiruzen Sarutobi. Anybody who knows Kakashi knows that this is uncommon. The elite Jonin was only ever on time if specifically ordered by the Hokage to be, otherwise, he was at least an hour and a half late. This being one of the times he was ordered, Kakashi made sure he arrived promptly. Don't want a Batoon time, the masked shinobi thought as he leaned against a wall for a few minutes. Orders or not, he had a reputation to uphold. When he was sufficiently late, but not late enough to be reprimanded, he strode lazily into the building. As he walked through the building, some stared, some glanced, and some didn't pay him any attention at all. That was about the level of notoriety that he was comfortable with. Perfect. When he reached the Hokage's floor, The secretary never even bothered to address him, she just motioned him on in. The Hokage was sitting back in his chair, puffing on his pipe when Kakashi walked in. 7:04, he said without checking any clocks. Perfectly timed, Kakashi. Kakashi was pleased that somebody appreciated what he considered his best skill. Despite this though, the Hokage didn't summon him like this all that often. It was likely to be an S-ranked mission, and that required him to be serious. Thank you, Hokage-sama. I am at your service. The copy nin replied. Relax Kakashi. There are no S ranks for you today, though what I am about to ask of you is equally as important. Sarutobi said, his demeanor somewhere between kind old man and military dictator. As you know, the academy just graduated our next crop of potential genin earlier today. Kakashi knew. He had taken Sasuke out to celebrate, despite the boy's reluctance. He nodded to indicate his understanding. I understand that you have taken a liking to young Sasuke, and have even been training him a little bit. Kakashi didn't respond, so the Sannin continued. You also have a strong connection with Naruto, despite not having that much interaction with him. Kakashi nodded at this. He wanted to spend more time with him, but he was reminded of Minato-sensei and Kushina every time he looked at him, and quite frankly it hurt. My intention is to put them on the same team. Normally we tend to pair the last place student with the top student to keep teams balanced. While Naruto is last place on the book side of things, nobody is under the impression that he's not just as good as Sasuke, if not better. Kakashi's eyes smiled. He was happy his two favorite kids were the strongest. However, Sarutobi continued, the two seem to get along best together. Sasuke tends to break out of his shell more around Naruto, and it seems that he keeps Naruto slightly calmer. They also appear to push each other past limits that nobody would be able to expect otherwise. The two of them end up reaching the levels that my own students did, and I believe that they would also bring up the level of whichever kunoichi we decide to place with them. He said. Kakashi was about to speak. It was his intention to request to be the Jonin sensei of the two regardless, but the Hokage put his hand up, silencing him before he ever spoke. I'm sorry Kakashi, but I will not be making you their Jonin sensei. Your job will be even more difficult. Kakashi's head tilted, not unlike his summons. We haven't had a shinobi with an analytical eye like yours in quite a while, Kakashi. Sarutobi explained slowly. Sometimes I believe you see more than I do, even without your Sharingan. Kakashi didn't like where this was going. After a long pause, the Hokage leaned forward on his desk and continued. Kakashi, I'm not getting any younger, and currently there is nobody to take my place. Tsunade or Jiraiya would be great, but one won't take the job, and the other won't come back to the village. I need to have somebody prepared in case of an untimely demise, and neither of my students will take the job. I wish for that to be you Kakashi. Sannin-sama, I am honored that you would think that highly of me, but I am not strong enough to be the Hokage. I'm nowhere near the level that my sensei was. Kakashi explained. No, I don't suppose you are. Then again, Minato was the greatest of us, and not many people will ever reach his level of competence, even with his life cut short as it was. The Hokage looked old, older than Kakashi had ever seen him. But I also understand that you've been slacking on your training. Your 18-year-old self would likely defeat you, and fairly soundly at that if I had to guess. The Hokage held up his hand again, once again silencing Kakashi before he could speak. Do not worry about it, Kakashi-kun. I allowed it because you were grieving, and you were still completing missions for us well enough. He said, but now it is time for you to move past all that. I truly believe Naruto will be Hokage someday, but he is not ready for that, and somebody must bridge the gap between my end and his beginning. I would like for it to be one of my students, but I need you to be ready if it's not. You know there are others who would try and steal the power away, and that would be bad for both Naruto-kun and Sasuke. Another pause from the two, the silence was deafening. Kakashi was too shocked to speak, and the Sannin was too exhausted. Finally, the latter spoke again. Your new mission Kakashi is twofold. You will train your body to reach your former abilities, and then you will surpass them. It has been a long time since we've had war, and while I don't see it on the near horizon, it is always looming. You need to be powerful enough to protect your comrades, and I truly believe you can get there. Sarutobi explained, a little bit of power leaking into his voice. The second part of your mission. You will be in charge of genin. All the genin. I did not mention your analytical eye for no reason. You will be able to watch the genin, and figure out their strengths and weaknesses better than anybody else, and help shore those up. You also have a library of jutsu that you could help teach them. The genin will still have their jonin senseis like always, but you will be in charge of them. Scheduling training, deciding when they're ready for C ranks, if they're ready for the chunin exams. All that and more will come through you. I'm trusting the next generation of Konoha to you. There are 8 clan heirs in this class, and likely a future Hokage. You will have to push them harder than any genin teams before them. It is your job to make sure that they live up to their great expectations. The Sannin finished. He placed his pipe back in his mouth and inhaled deeply, indicating that he was done speaking. Kakashi's mouth was hanging open. He didn't know what to say. He truly didn't believe that he was ready for all of that. He didn't think he was ready for any of that. But the third Hokage was wise, and had more experience as Hokage than he did years alive. If you believe that is what is best, Sannin-sama, then I accept the mission. Hiruzen nodded at him. I do have one question though. Who will be Naruto and Sasuke's sensei? He asked. The Hokage smiled slightly. I think you'll be happy with my decision. The newly minted genin gathered around in their classroom for one last time. Iruka smiled at them all proudly. They truly were excellent students, even the pyromaniac in the back. The only reason Naruto had passed the written test was because Iruka had gotten permission from the Hokage to threaten him not to light it on fire. Even then, the blonde had filled out exactly 60% of the test, and gotten every question right. Just barely enough to pass. Iruka shook his head at the thought. The blonde had been the first to finish, and then he had laid his head down on the desk to sleep. Naruto and Sasuke had easily finished ahead of everybody on the physical aspects of the test, alternating between first and second. Sasuke had the highest score of the boys, getting all but the one question that was meant to be chunin level right, making him the rookie of the year. Sakura aced the test, surprisingly enough, and did better than expected on the physical aspects. She was, however, beaten out by Hinata for top kunoichi. The Hyuga heiress seemed to be slowly turning over a new leaf, becoming less and less shy. She dominated the other girls in the class when it came to the physical aspects. While her chakra control wasn't quite as good as Sakura's, it was pretty close, and better than anybody else's. She also only scored 1 point lower than Sasuke on the test. Alright class, settle down, Iruka said, trying to get them all to stop talking. Naturally, nobody had even heard him because a certain blonde was loudly recounting a tale of a trip to Takigakure, hidden waterfall. Quiet, Iruka shouted. That did the trick. It's time to announce your teams, Iruka said. And I'll only be focusing on the rookie 9. Even though their class is stronger than usual, I don't want to make 6 or so OCs right off the bat, though some of them might make an appearance later on in the story. Team 1. Team 7. Naruto Uzumaki, awesome. Hinata Hyuga, and Sasuke Uchiha. Iruka-sensei, did you have to stick me with the brooder? Naruto asked. He was happy to have Sasuke on his team though, he was strong and they had become good friends. What do you mean, Naruto? You specifically came to me and asked to have Sasuke on your team because of how cool he was. Iruka said playfully. The whole class laughed, except Naruto, who scowled. Just be quiet so he can continue, loser. Sasuke said. It would take a Sharingan to notice the slight smirk on his face, but it was there. Naruto stuck his tongue out in defiance, but stayed quiet. Thank you Sasuke. Team 8 will be Sakura Haruno, Kiba Inuzuka, and Shino Aburame. Sakura was pissed. She didn't really mind Kiba, boisterous as he was, and Shino was alright even though he had those bugs. She wasn't on Sasuke's team though, and that angered her. Why had she been working so hard if not to end up on his team and impress him? Like Team 5, Team 9 is still in circulation, so Team 10 will be Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akamichi. All three had basically come to terms with the fact that they would be on a team because of how well their clans got along. They were neither unhappy nor happy about the team as a whole, though Shikamaru and Choji were content to be together. Alright, that's all the teams. You guys can break for lunch, and then meet back here in an hour to find out who your senseis will be. Naruto and Sasuke wordlessly began to leave the room side by side. Hinata was sad, she was hoping that they would invite her to lunch. There would be more time to spend with them in the future though. Her thoughts were interrupted when her favorite blonde spoke. Hinata, are you coming? He asked. Oh, I didn't know I was invited. She replied. What do you mean? Naruto asked confused. We're a team now, we should do everything together ya know. Come on, he said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Oh okay Naruto. Hinata replied, cheeks turning pink. She was embarrassed that she had stuttered. She had been working really hard on her nervous stutter and being more confident, but it seemed she still had work to do, especially where Naruto was concerned. As they were walking out of the room, Naruto and Sasuke wordlessly played rock, paper, scissors. The blonde made a loud exclamation having won, and then the three continued on their way. Hinata was confused by this, as she had no idea what they had done that for. She soon found out when they came to a ramen stand in the village. Haha, thank God I won. Ramen is the best. Naruto shouted as they all sat down at the bar. Hey old man, better get that oil fired up because there's 3 of us today. Naruto, Sasuke, how are my 2 favorite customers? And who's your friend? Tucci said pointing to Hinata. 2 favorite customers? Does that mean we're tied? Old man, you wound me. How could you ever consider Sasuke and I equals when it comes to ramen? Naruto said deadly serious. Tucci thought he might be joking, but ramen was involved, so he couldn't say for sure. Oh Naruto, you know you'll always be our favorite. Ayame said coming from the back. No offense of course, Sasuke, she smiled at the 2 most frequent visitors. Sasuke replied. He didn't really care much for ramen. It was good, but not great, and he didn't understand Naruto's obsession with it. Ha, eat it, bastard, Naruto shouted, pointing dramatically at the Uchiha, who ignored him. Oh, this is Hinata by the way. Naruto gestured to the shy Hyuga, causing her to blush slightly. She's our newest team member, we're officially Team 7, ya know. The blonde's excitement caused both Ayame and Tucci to chuckle. Well Hinata, it's great to meet you, I'm glad Naruto got such a cutie as a teammate. Ayame exclaimed. This caused both Naruto and Hinata to blush from embarrassment. You know Sasuke and I don't care about that big sis. We just wanna be awesome shinobi right, bastard? Naruto didn't wait for the response, as he knew he wouldn't get one. We're gonna be the best team since the Sannin. Actually we're gonna be even better than them ya know. Naruto shouted, chest puffed out. Well I'm glad I'm feeding future legendary ninja. Here's the first round Naruto. Iruka stopped by and mentioned you'd probably be here around this time, so he started cooking before you got here. Tucci explained. All 3 new genin broke apart their chopsticks and dug in. After 20 minutes, Naruto leaned over to Sasuke. Sasuke, how do you know if you're in love? Naruto whispered to him. Sasuke stopped eating, looked Naruto in the eye for a second, leaned forward and looked at Hinata, who had eaten 8 bowls already, looked back at Naruto, and exhaled a short breath. You can't be in love with somebody just because they can eat ramen better than you, Naruto. He whispered back. Naruto nodded firmly to this. Right, I knew that, he whispered again. Hey wait, Hinata can't eat ramen better than me. Naruto got increasingly louder. Old man, get us 3 more bowls each and we'll have a contest. He proclaimed. Everybody was staring at Naruto, trying to figure out when he'd stood up on the counter. Then everybody started laughing at him. Naruto swore he even saw Sasuke breathe through nose a little bit sharper than normal. Team 7 made their way back to the academy to learn who their sensei would be, but something was wrong. They were quiet, much too quiet considering a certain Uzumaki was a part of the group. Said genin was walking between his 2 teammates, head hung, face sad, and an invisible rain cloud chasing him. After minutes of silence, a record around Naruto, Hinata couldn't take it anymore. Naruto-kun, I'm sorry I ate the bowls faster than you. I knew you loved ramen, but I didn't know you loved it that much. She said, stifling a giggle at the end. It's fine, Hinata. You did your best, I can't be mad about that. I'm just sad I lost. Naruto said glumly. Sasuke had seen Naruto like this a few times, and had learned how to deal with him. Distraction. Don't worry about it Hinata. Naruto is just being a big baby. He's probably just worried that we'll get Kakashi as a sensei and he'll get stuck in a genjutsu again. Sasuke said. Oi. Naruto shot up, shaking his fist at Sasuke. I wanted to get stuck in that genjutsu, I could have gotten out of it easily if I wanted to. Naruto responded, referencing the time Kakashi used an A-ranked genjutsu on him that Naruto definitely couldn't have gotten out of. I'm sure you could have, loser. Do you think we'll get Kakashi? Sasuke questioned. He was silently hoping that they would. He would never admit it, but along with Naruto, Kakashi was one of the few other people in the village that he liked. Perhaps the only other person. After plenty of hours with Hinata helping her train, Sasuke had learned to like her too, he supposed, or at the very least tolerate her. I dunno, Naruto said flatly. Sure, he's got a lot of jutsu, but I bet that I could take him if I went all out. Hinata giggled at Naruto, claiming he could beat one of Konoha's strongest and most famous jonin. I guess there's only one way to find out, Naruto-kun. She wasn't so intimidated by the blonde after spending lunch with him and seeing his goofiness up close and personal. He was so much fun to be around, she forgot about her shyness a little bit. Alright Team 7, let's do it. Naruto shouted, pushing through the doors. Naruto's hands were sweating and his heart was pounding. He was so excited to find out who his sensei was, that he was actually nervous. He hadn't been nervous since his first day of real training with Jiraiya almost 1 year ago. And Team 7, your Jonin sensei will be Yamato. None of the 3 genin had ever heard of a Yamato before. Their heads snapped to the door when it slid open. A tall man walked stiffly through the doorway, short, brown hair bobbing ever so slightly. His stern face was framed by a Hapori-style leaf forehead protector, the kind the second Hokage wore, and betrayed none of his emotions. He wore the standard Konoha Jonin attire, with the exception of his shirt, which was tighter, and the neck of it ran up to make a sort of skin-tight chin guard. Despite his bland appearance, Naruto thought he was pretty cool. He had noticed the large katana strapped to the man's back, and was instantly excited. Team 7, I am your Jonin sensei. You may call me Yamato. Please meet me at Training Ground 7 as soon as possible. As quickly as he had entered and spoke, Yamato shunshined out of the room. On second thought, he's kind of boring, Naruto thought at hearing Yamato's plain voice and lack of enthusiasm. It only took a few minutes for the trio to make it to the training ground, though Hinata couldn't help but feel like she was slowing them down. Yamato was fairly impressed at how quickly his 3 students got to the training ground. They were fast for genin, or potential genin. I believe now would be a good time to get to know each other a little bit about each other. Why don't you all tell me your name, best shinobi art, weakest shinobi art, and goals as a ninja? Yamato asked. Kakashi-senpai had suggested he ask about hobbies and other miscellaneous things, but Yamato didn't find that prudent at the moment. Sensei, could you go first to give us an idea? Hinata asked nervously. Nonsense Hinata, I'll go first. Naruto yelled, not allowing Yamato to respond. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I don't have a best shinobi art because I'm the best at all of them, ya know. His chest puffed out in pride. Though I guess if I had to pick one it'd be ninjutsu or maybe fuinjutsu, that's starting to get fun. He seemed to be talking more to himself than his team at this point. My weakest is probably genjutsu, he said sheepishly, returning back to earth. I can detect and break them alright, but I can't do one yet. But I'll learn, just you wait. When he realized he'd gotten on another tangent, he corrected his course. I just have 2 goals for my life. Restore my clan to its former awesome glory and become the Hokage and protect all the people I care about, ya know. Very well, Yamato responded dryly. Naruto's sweat dropped, but at least he hadn't told him it wasn't possible. Seeing that Hinata was too shy to go next, Sasuke decided to speak up. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. My best skill is taijutsu. I'm very good at all the main 3 shinobi arts, so I suppose my weakness is fuinjutsu, for now. My goal is also to restore my clan, and to avenge those that were killed. Sasuke finished, voice tight at the thought of what his brother did. Yamato just nodded at him, then turned to Hinata expectantly. The Hyuga took a deep breath and summoned all her confidence. She even looked her sensei in the eye as she spoke. My name is Hinata Hyuga. My greatest ninja art is taijutsu, though I'm not as good as either of my teammates. My biggest weakness is ninjutsu, as I can't do any of my clan's more advanced ones yet. My goal is to prove to my father that I can be a worthy member of the Hyuga clan, and to unite the main family with the branch family. She said resolutely, leaving out her 3rd goal as she looked to her blonde teammate who was shooting her a huge smile. She blushed at him. Very good. My name is Yamato. My ninjutsu is my best skill. Genjutsu is my worst skill, though I am still proficient at it. My goal is to continue to be a valuable ninja to the village. Their sensei said. Now, it is time for your test to become genin. Alright Yamato-sensei, bring it on. We can take anything ya know. Yamato tilted his head almost imperceptibly at this. Graduates weren't supposed to know about there being another test administered by the Jonin sensei. In fact, they were supposed to get flustered when they learned they hadn't really passed. Dealing with that was part of the test. What do you mean? I thought we passed already? Hinata asked. She was now becoming extremely nervous. Does it really matter, Hinata? The three of us are the most awesome of the graduates. There's no way that we won't pass. Naruto said, giving her a foxy grin. Sasuke grunted in agreement in the background. Hinata returned a small smile. Naruto's attitude was infectious. Naruto took this as confirmation that they were ready. Alright, sensei, tell us about your dumb test. He said confidently, staring Yamato down. Very well. Your team is actually a special case in that you will have to pass 2 tests. He paused, looking for reactions. The Uchiha didn't seem to react at all, though the Hyuga seemed to lose just a little bit of her confidence. Most worrisome was the Uzumaki though, as he seemed to get more excited at his. First, like all other teams, you will have to pass my Jonin instructor test to see if you qualify to be my students. He paused again, but the trio didn't change at all. If you pass the first test you will become full-fledged genin. The second test is to see if you can handle the training regimen that has been recommended for you by the genin commander. He continued, referring to Kakashi's new unofficial title. This year's teams were organized differently than normal. They were put together for specific reasons, with hopes that they will stick together and be able to complete advanced missions in their area of expertise down the line. Team 7 was arranged to be a heavy combat squad. You will take regular missions just like other teams, but your main purpose will be combat. Therefore, you will often be called in as backup for other teams that aren't as strong in the area. Yamato explained. All 3 members reacted in their own way. Sasuke's lips upturned in a smirk, Naruto's grin threatened to split his face, and Hinata looked even more nervous, much more like she had been at the beginning of the year. Test number 1 is to fight me. In order to pass, you must land 2 successful blows on me, or force me into a position where you could subdue or kill me. If you fail, you will be sent back to the academy to repeat your final year. The reactions grew. The boys seemed to love a challenge, while Hinata seemed worried. If you aren't fighting to kill me, you will not be able to land a single blow on me. Take this seriously, I'm a Jonin, I can handle it. No explosive tags over grade 2 though. Naruto could have sworn he glanced at him nervously when he said that, but it happened so quickly he couldn't be sure. Grade 2 explosives were the lowest level designed for combat. Grade 1 were only for spars, 3 and 4 were meant to seriously injure or kill, and grade 5 were designed for destroying buildings or caravans. If you pass the first test, I will tell you about the second test. You have 4 hours. Begin. Yamato started the test and sunshined out so quickly that all 3 of them were surprised. Naruto hopped up from his seat in the grass, his 2 teammates following suit. He looked at Sasuke. Ready, you grumpy bastard? Sasuke rolled his eyes. That's a yes. He turned to Hinata, and saw how worried she looked, and laid a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry Hinata, he might be a Jonin, but we can do it. We just have to land a few solid hits, it's not like we have to capture or kill him. Hinata instantly felt better, and extremely warm. She quickly turned away before Naruto could see how red her face was turning. You're right Naruto-kun, I believe that we can do this. She said, and she did. She felt like anything was possible if Naruto was helping. Behind Naruto, Sasuke rolled his eyes once more. Hinata had confided in him about her crush on Naruto when she had first asked Sasuke for some extra training, and he thought her reactions to him were ridiculous. He was just Naruto, a goofy loser with a ramen addiction, there was no need to get so worked up. While Sasuke didn't really care that much about feelings and all that, he agreed to help her become stronger. He was curious however, as to why her clan wasn't doing the training. It didn't really matter to him in the long run, she was his teammate now, and he and Naruto would make sure she caught up quickly. Naruto and Sasuke then turned to each other and seemed to have a conversation just by looking. Naruto finally nodded his head. Right, here's the plan. Hinata, Sasuke and I will handle the majority of the interactions with sensei. He walks like he has a stick up his butt, and he has very few emotions, so he's definitely Anbu or former Anbu. He's been assigned to the last Uchiha and Uzumaki, as well as the Hyuga princess. He managed to tease despite being serious in a way that Hinata had never seen before. She blushed. So he's definitely a high-level Jonin. We'll need you to use your Byakugan to help locate him. How long can you keep it activated? Naruto asked. Hinata had nearly become lost in the blonde's deep blue eyes, so it took her a second to respond. I can keep it active for an hour straight, but it needs to rest for about the same amount of time that it's been active. She responded. She had hesitated and said like some fangirl, and she wasn't happy with herself about it. Maybe her father was right. That's awesome, Hinata-chan. Naruto exclaimed, reading her facial expressions and seeing she needed a boost. Alright, once we get moving, I want you to alternate 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off and search for him. Can you handle that? She nodded firmly at him, determined to prove him right. Sasuke and I will help narrow down the search area as we go. Now, he's a high-level Jonin, but he doesn't know all our tricks yet, so if we work together I think that we can catch him by surprise. Naruto thought for a few seconds then asked, anything to add, Sasuke? His movements are sharp and efficient. If he was Anbu, he'll likely take a flesh wound in order to block a killing blow. We should try and land multiple attacks at once. Ninjutsu is his best skill, so we should try and prevent him from using it. Naruto, how long do you think you could hold him? Sasuke asked, referencing Naruto's ability to suppress chakra using his chakra chains. If he's as high level as I think he is, probably only a few seconds. Naruto said, jaw clenched. He hated not being able to completely subdue someone. Okay, then I think our best bet is for you to catch him, and Hinata to deliver the blow. Her clan's taijutsu style will do damage no matter the level of the opponent, we just have to get her an opening. Sasuke said. Hinata nodded at this. She didn't get the same warm feeling as when Naruto complimented her, but it felt good in a different way that Sasuke thought she was capable. He wasn't the type to lie to make others feel better. With that, the 3 academy graduates headed off into the forest to find their sensei. Kakashi was impressed. He had made 7 shadow clones, which was basically his current limit while fresh, and sent them out to the 7 teams that had graduated. He himself watched Team 7's test, curious to see how his 2 favorite graduates were doing. 3 of the 8 teams had passed, slightly more than the average 33%. Teams 8 and 10 had been impressive. Kurenai had tested Team 8 by making them track her down through several genjutsu that were expertly woven. Both the Aburame and Inuzuka had handled it well, using their clan techniques to hunt her down. The big surprise was the civilian, Sakura Haruno. She had excellent chakra control, and had been able to detect and dispel all the lower-level genjutsu the Kurenai cast near instantly. Kakashi was pretty sure she had even seen her use a sensing technique to try and help her teammates find their sensei. Team 10 had acted as expected from an Ino Shika Cho trio. The Nara had come up with the plan, and the Akamichi and Yamanaka had both helped herd their sensei. When Asuma was in place, Shikamaru had sprung the trap, a double bluff, that led to him using his shadow possession to catch his sensei. Shikamaru was under no impression that his shadow possession could hold his sensei if it couldn't even hold Naruto though. Flashback, 1 month into the academy. When it came to their first full ninjutsu spar, Naruto was meant to fight Shikamaru. Shikamaru generally wasn't one to participate, and would often forfeit before even starting. Naruto had piqued his curiosity however, so he elected to fight. Figuring that Naruto wouldn't know anything about the Nara clan techniques, Shikamaru immediately made the signs for shadow possession jutsu and his shadow extended to Naruto. Naruto himself was curious as to what was going on, but when the shadow touched his, he panicked just a little bit. He couldn't move his body. What kind of genjutsu is this? Naruto shouted, unaware of what was really going on. Shikamaru just raised an eyebrow at his reaction. Genjutsu like this won't work on me. Naruto shouted, building up his chakra, release. The shadow connecting the two shattered, and everybody felt a small wave of wind pressure. Everybody's mouth was hanging open, including Iruka's. So troublesome. Sensei, I forfeit, Shikamaru said. He knew that the shadow possession could be disrupted by chakra, but he also knew the opponent had to be much stronger than the user. He kept his lazy demeanor, even as he heard Sasuke tell Naruto that, "It's not a genjutsu, loser," but inwardly Shikamaru was shaken. He knew he was pretty much last in class, but that was supposed to be from a lack of effort, not ability. Now, not only was Sasuke obviously better than him, but Naruto was apparently leagues ahead of him. He would have to ask his father for some additional training if he was this far behind. So troublesome. He had been going through the extra training with his father, as much as the main had complained about it. It had been helping too, but he didn't think he could hold a high-level Jonin in place if they knew how to break it. Kakashi knew that the team would be skilled in tactics, given the previous renditions of the team. They would need work physically though. The Nara just wasn't strong enough or fast enough. Same with the Yamanaka. Choji, being in Akamichi, packed quite a punch already, but he needed to get faster, or he'd never be able to land a blow. Team 7 had been the most impressive however, despite his high expectations for them. They found Yamato after 25 minutes, a feat in its own right given the size of the training ground. The former Anbu was under orders not to go all out, but to push them as hard as he could. That meant he was not to dip below Jonin level for any of his skills. He had handled them easily enough when they first found him. Naruto had thrown several kunai with explosive tags to steer him towards Sasuke's thrown shuriken. Yamato simply pulled out his own kunai and deflected them. The real issue came about when the blonde and raven-haired boys looked at each other and developed a gleam in their eyes. They both ran through hand signs and firmly said their jutsu names. Fire release, great fireball jutsu. Wind release, great breakthrough. Yamato's face paled when the two jutsu collided. They would have been impressive separately, but together they actually made him nervous. He quickly sped through familiar hand seals and made a wood dome. He didn't want to reveal his techniques this early, if at all, but he saw no other choice. He wouldn't have time to mold enough chakra for a mud wall that would be able to withstand it. Similarly, he couldn't make a water technique that would be able to handle a combo technique this strong. When he had felt the force of the technique dissipate, he released the snake seal that his hands were in, canceling the technique. He immediately had to counter shuriken and kunai that were thrown at him. He flung his kunai back at his attacker, and it hit its mark. The blonde it hit smirked before popping into smoke. Yamato heard the crackle of lightning coming from his right, and saw Sasuke holding out his hands. He quickly ran through hand seals knowing Earth wouldn't do the trick as he heard Sasuke say his jutsu name. Lightning release. Thunderclap arrow, water release, water wall. Yamato literally spit out. Using water release without water around was extremely taxing on his reserves, but he couldn't afford to use earth release against a lightning technique. He knew that Sasuke could use both lightning and fire release, but both the techniques he had used were C rank. Generally C-rank techniques require the user to have finished the first step in chakra nature manipulation. If a shinobi was especially talented, or there was enough of the element in the area, i.e. a river or earth, then it could be done. That meant that Sasuke was either truly a genius, or Kakashi was training a monster. Yamato just had time to decide that it was both, when he felt something start to wrap around him. The real Naruto had snuck up behind him and used his chakra chains to hold him in place. Yamato could feel his chakra being suppressed, but knew he could break it in the same way he would a genjutsu. He was just about done building up his chakra when he heard Naruto. "Now, Hinata," he shouted. The Hyuga came flying in from his left, veins around her eyes showing, and one hand extended, aiming for his heart. She was coming in fast, he would have to hurry. Yamato released his chakra at full force. It was enough to expel the chains, but harder than it should have been. He rotated counterclockwise and leaned back, just out of the Hyuga's reach. He continued his rotation until he delivered a hard right fist to her ribs. It left him off balance, but he had to get her outside of his guard so he could reset the fight. It would have worked too, if that Hinata hadn't been a Hengid shadow clone. The real Hinata came out from the tree she was hiding behind. Now behind Yamato, she rushed in full speed to deliver a chakra-laden strike to the back of his right thigh. She hadn't wanted to hurt her sensei, but Naruto and Sasuke had reassured her that he could handle a full-powered strike as long as it wasn't aimed for an organ. Yamato tried to rotate out of the way, but couldn't gain his balance in time. Hinata's strike hit him square in the hamstring, and he felt the leg go numb. Yamato used the force of her blow to continue his rotation even more. His right leg was nearly useless, but his left wasn't. As he rotated on his out-of-commission leg, slowly dropping, he brought his left leg up, and caught Hinata in the shoulder with his heel. She flew back a few feet, and landed on her side, skidding across the grass. Before she even stopped, Naruto and Sasuke were both standing in front of her, kunai in hand. The former looked pissed, while the latter donned his typical Uchiha mask. His eyes betrayed him ever so slightly though, at least for someone of Yamato's caliber. He saw the tightness there. The Uchiha was mad too. The enemies will not take it easy on you, so I won't either. It would be a disservice to you to do so, Yamato said calmly, trying to stall without being noticed. The feeling would come back to his leg, but he would need at least a few minutes. I don't care what you say. If you hit my teammate and friend, I'll give it back to you tenfold. The blonde said. His eyes started to turn slitted, and they turned from their regular deep light blue to a purple color, verging on red. His voice had gained an edge that one often didn't hear from someone so inexperienced. If Yamato didn't know his opponent's skill level, he might have been scared. As it was, he was on edge more than normal. He wasn't running low on chakra yet, but his wood release and water release techniques had used up more than he was comfortable with considering it was 3 versus 1. He was also on essentially one leg at this point. Granted, he could defeat them soundly if he really went all out, but he wasn't supposed to maim them, and they only had to land a single blow on him to pass. Plus, he had to make sure to monitor Naruto as it appeared he was beginning to tap into the Kyuubi's power. He would need chakra to spare if he had to suppress a Biju. Naruto-kun, it's fine. I'm okay, Hinata said. She was holding her left shoulder as she stood up. I let my guard down after landing the blow. It was a good lesson that I wouldn't have learned if he took it easy on me. There was disappointment in her voice, but also determination. She dropped into the gentle fist stance. Let us land the second blow before he recovers from his injury. Naruto's breathing evened, but the influence of the Kyuubi didn't leave his eyes. He grinned. All right, Hinata. He held up his signature hand seal. Let's do this. 10 clones popped into existence, surrounding Yamato and Team 7. Each clone held a ram seal, and 3 chains extended from their torso. 1 to each side, and 1 upwards. The gold chains all interlinked forming a dome, and Yamato saw it. A barrier. Kakashi hadn't said anything about barriers. Up in the trees, looking down on the test, Sharingan blazing, Kakashi smirked under his mask. He hadn't told Team 7 anything about Yamato, so he thought it was fair that he kept some things from him. Yamato lasted another 30 seconds with the 3 graduates, in addition to a plethora of clones, landed another blow. Even Kakashi was impressed considering the disadvantage that Yamato was at. He even landed a few blows back on the trio before Naruto finally snuck in a solid punch. Team 7 was officially a genin team. Naruto was grinning, Hinata had a full smile on her face, and Sasuke even had a big smirk on his face. Kakashi was extremely proud of them, but he didn't want to enforce what would come next. He now understood why Lord Third hadn't let him be their sensei. He would have been too soft on them. They needed to be pushed, and hard. Kakashi landed in the clearing where the 3 preteens were talking with their sensei about their test. Kakashi, did you see how awesome we were? Naruto shouted. His smile was blinding, and Kakashi returned it through his one uncovered eye. He was unsurprised that Naruto knew he was watching. The boy was a natural sensor, and Kakashi hadn't been trying too hard to hide his chakra. I did, Naruto. You 3 did very well. Even better than expected actually. All 3 genin's smiles widened. It's time for the second part of your test though, Kakashi said, and the smiles shortened. You 3 are meant to be the strongest combat team we've had since, well, my team. Kakashi explained, casually leaning against a tree. 3 teams of your class passed their genin test. Team 7, 8, and 10 inches, he said, recalling his clone's memories. All 3 teams will be trained harder than genin usually are, as there are 8 clan heirs in this class. Your team will be trained the hardest. You will be pushed harder than before, even harder than Jiraiya pushed you, Naruto. The blonde paled at this a little bit. The Chunin exams are coming up in 6 months, and they will be hosted in Konoha. You will be expected to advance to the finals by that time. In order to ensure that, you will have to be more than ready for anything that can happen. Yamato here will ensure that. So what's the second test? Hinata asked, nervousness creeping in. I'm glad you asked, Hinata. Kakashi said, eyes smiling. Yamato will explain it to you. He said, and shunshined away. Yamato's sweat dropped. The three genin turned to him expectantly. I will explain exactly what is to happen when we get to training ground 44. Let's go, he said, his voice grim. Team 7 arrived at training ground 44 a little while later. They were a little tired from traveling across the village, but they were more nervous about what would happen, even Naruto. They stood in front of the fence to the training ground, reading all the dangerous warnings when Yamato spoke. It will be a survival exercise. You will spend 2 weeks in the forest, with no food or water taken in. He turned to Naruto. Anything you have sealed in scrolls will have to be left with me. I know shinobi often cheat and lie to get the mission done, but this is for your benefit. It's a test, but the purpose is to get you ready for even harder training. If you cheat in there, you will not be ready. He explained. You will be allowed 3 kunai each, 5 shuriken, 1 roll of ninja wire. Sasuke groaned. Naruto, you will not be allowed to take your sealing supplies. Naruto looked like he wanted to complain, but he just nodded, and stripped off his vest, as well as the large scroll on his back. He recalled the supplies Yamato allowed from the storage seal on the side of his scroll, as well as a hip pouch for them. When he was situated, he nodded at Yamato. Now listen to me carefully. You haven't gotten to know me very well, and you'll probably hate me after this, but I'm doing it because it will be the best thing for you. If you survive this test, your abilities will start to skyrocket. This will give you an extreme amount of experience, without having to leave the relative safety of the village. Just because you're in the village though, doesn't mean you're safe. The animals and plants in there will all try and kill you, and they will do it at every hour of the night or day. They are mutated from normal animals, bigger, faster, and stronger. You will not be safe. He explained. He was worried about them, even though he just met them. There are traps that have been laid out there as a part of training exercises as well. You must have your guard up and protect each other at all times. But you'll be there to help if anything goes wrong, alright? Hinata asked. She was scared. Her Jonin sensei had just told her that the forest would be trying to kill her. Yamato shook his head, face as grim as they had seen it in their short time together. You will be alone. He lied. They couldn't know they were being watched. If we afford you a safety net, you will not be pushed past your limits. He said. They all nodded, albeit hesitantly. Unsurprisingly, it was Naruto who broke them out of their stupor. Alright, Team 7, I'm gonna be the Hokage someday, and I can't be the Hokage if I die in this dumb forest. And I'll die before I let either of my comrades, so we'll just have to find a way through Yano. He then listed rule number 1 to Sasuke, who nodded resolutely. Yamato was inwardly already a little proud of his team. He had done his best to scare them so that they would be ready, but they handled it well. He could also see the natural leadership that the blonde had, and how it was raising up both of his teammates. Naruto faced his new teacher. Alright, Yamato-sensei, we're ready. With that, the Uzumaki, Uchiha, and Hyuga headed into the Forest of Death. Chapter 11. The Forest of Death. Naruto hated Training Ground 44. Hated this forest. Hated the animals, the plants, and the bugs. It was fun at first. Maybe even cool. They saw a few huge tigers, which was awesome. It was even cooler when they saw vines snare a tiger and basically eat it. Could plants eat a giant tiger? He was starting to think anything was possible in this dark section of hell. Things had turned from awesome to awful in the span of 20 minutes. They were starting to get hungry on the second day, and decided to hunt something larger than fish to feed all 3 of them. Sasuke was able to take down a deer with a kunai. Simple. Until everything went downhill. They were preparing the deer for cooking, but hadn't even gotten the fire started when it attacked. Naruto sensed something was wrong at the last second, but it was too late to warn the others. He leapt in front of Sasuke, who was down on a knee skinning the deer. Fast enough to save his friend, but not fast enough to defend himself. One swipe had taken him down, and the animal was back in the shadows before they could even see it. 4 large slashes across Naruto's chest, from left shoulder to right hip. Hinata panicked. There was so much blood. She'd never seen that much blood before. Sasuke called upon his Sharingan, putting distance between himself and the dead deer. Phoenix came out of the bushes. Slowly creeping, deadly silent. Coiled and ready to strike. The jaguar in front of them felt deadly, deadlier than any person or animal they had faced before. It could kill them if it wanted to, at least right now. They weren't prepared to face something like this. Not with Naruto out of commission. The bears, and even the tigers had been fairly easy to avoid. They were very large, and no doubt powerful, but they traded power for speed, and they were heavy. Too heavy to climb to the height in the trees that the three genin could travel at. This beast, though, was different. Sasuke's Sharingan could see the muscles tense and relax as it crept towards them. He had no doubt it was faster than him, no doubt it was stronger than him. There was no way he and Hinata would be able to stop it, not while also defending an unconscious Naruto. For the first time since the night his brother had murdered the clan, Sasuke felt fear. For himself, and for his teammates. They weren't family yet, but they were close. Naruto might as well have been his brother, and Hinata was the closest thing he ever had to a sister. He wouldn't call them family, they weren't close enough for that yet, and he wasn't ready to let somebody be that close to him. But at the same time he couldn't watch them die. Not the way he'd been made to watch his family die. Hinata, find a clear path for us away from here. Take Naruto, and get out. I'll be right behind you. Sasuke couldn't afford to take his eyes off of the predator in front of them, so he just had to trust that Hinata would follow his directions. He knew she was too scared to respond, and too worried about Naruto. He knew, because he was too, but he had forced himself to speak, or lose the person who understood him the best. That thought made him eerily calm. It had only been about a year with Naruto in the village, but they had spent nearly every day together. It hadn't been planned, one of them just showed up, and the other would come along without argument or question. They had a bond that Sasuke was starting to feel like ran deeper than blood. They shared in their loneliness and misery of missing their families, yet kept one another distracted from those thoughts. He knew it was in there, but seeing Naruto lying there unconscious, blood seeping from his chest, and it made him come to terms with his own feelings. They were brothers. His eyes felt a pressure build in them, but he wouldn't cry. He couldn't afford to. His brother wouldn't die from the wounds. Naruto had explained that the Kyuubi could heal just about anything short of death. The wounds were deep, but not immediately fatal. He wouldn't be able to heal if this jaguar got him though, and he had a sneaking suspicion that this animal would be able to give chase in the trees. Sasuke pulled out his 5 kunai and 8 shuriken, as well as his 2 rolls of ninja wire. Naruto had wordlessly handed him all but 1 kunai and 2 shuriken when they entered the forest. He wanted to argue, but he knew the blonde would just claim that he wasn't as good with them as Sasuke was, and that he probably wouldn't use them anyway. Dumb idiot. Sasuke's eyes never left the creeping jungle cat. It had turned, and was beginning to pace back and forth. He didn't know why it didn't just rush them. Maybe it was trying to scare them, or maybe it was waiting for him to slip up and look away. Whatever it was, he was grateful for it, and wouldn't let the opportunity go to waste. Even as his eyes watched the predator's muscles ripple, his hands worked. With practiced ease he tied the ninja wire onto the tools that he'd gathered, faster than most ninja could write their own name. In seconds he was done, and he hoped this worked. It would have been much better with explosive tags, but they weren't allowed. Bastard sensei. The raven-haired boy didn't wait for the jaguar to pounce. As soon as he was ready, he let Hinata know. On my go, he said. Time felt like it was slowing down, and he could almost feel the air pressure shift as Hinata exhaled and nodded her head. He hoped that feeling wasn't misplaced. 3, 2, 1, go. He hissed. He let loose his ninja tools. 2 of the shuriken headed straight for their hunter. There were clanks of metal as the rest ricocheted off each other and stuck into trees in various places. The kunai landed in the dead deer up to the hilt, anchoring them in. The jaguar dodged the shuriken easily enough, not that Sasuke had really been trying to hit it. As with most shuriken throws, his goal was to move his opponent in a favorable direction. He held both ninja wire lines in his hands, the classic Uchiha smirk once again showing itself as he heard Hinata move away from him at his 5 o'clock. The jaguar had moved as his Sharingan predicted, leaving it right where he wanted it. He let go of the line in his right hand, and the wires attached to the shuriken snapped into place. This effect was twofold. The jaguar's front right paw was now tangled in the line, though it wouldn't hold long. It also put pressure on the other line in his hand, the one connected to the kunai. Before the jaguar could break the wire, he let go of the second one and fled. The kunai anchored and the deer were yanked, dragging the deer away from him, past where the jaguar had been. The jaguar would now have to spend a precious second freeing itself, and then choose between a free meal, or giving chase to 3 ninja with a head start. Sasuke didn't wait around to find out its decision. He ran as fast as he could, pushing himself to catch up to Hinata. It took him half a minute to, and when he did, he took Naruto into his own arms, and they moved even faster. It was 3 full minutes of all-out running before they stopped. Both dojutsu users had their precious eyes activated, scanning for trouble. 5 minutes went by, then 10, then 20, before they relaxed even a little bit. During that time, Hinata had checked up on Naruto. The bleeding had slowed greatly, and eventually came to a stop, much to her surprise. Still, there were deep gashes running across her chest, and she was upset that she hadn't been allowed to bring her pre-made ointments. She felt helpless. Hinata had been mesmerized by the predator that attacked them, unable to do anything but watch and listen to Sasuke. She was supposed to be the best sensor on the team with her all-seeing eyes, but she hadn't even had them activated when it attacked. She felt extreme guilt at not doing her job. She knew the other 2 were the heavy hitters on the team, and that she was just supposed to be the support, but she hadn't even done that right. Naruto had been the one that sensed something wrong and sprung into action. Her thoughts were interrupted by a hacking cough, and wheezing coming from her teammate. Holy hell, that cat packed a punch. He wheezed out, trying to sit up. Is everybody okay? He asked a little bit frantically. He trusted his team, but he had also left everything up to them, and didn't want them to get hurt. Yes, you moron. You could be dead right now though. Sasuke spat out. He was pissed. Naruto-kun, I'm so glad you're okay. Hinata said, uncharacteristically loud. She threw her arms around the blonde, hugging him. When she realized what she was doing, she let go, face red. You shouldn't be sitting up though. Your wounds are deep. Even as she said it though, the wounds had closed up even more. She frowned. I guess I owe you an explanation on the whole super healing, huh? Naruto asked, mostly rhetorically. Well, Sasuke already knows this. He paused and took a deep breath. Not many of his friends knew his secret. Jiraiya and the Sannin knew of course, and he suspected Kakashi did too. He himself had told Sasuke, and he doubted that Yamato-sensei didn't know, especially considering he was a wood release user. It wouldn't feel right keeping the secret from a teammate though, so he began channeling some of the Kyuubi's chakra. His eyes became slitted and red, and whiskers grew darker and more pronounced. He grinned sheepishly and Hinata saw that his teeth had grown a little bit more fang-like, and his fingernails now started to look like claws. I'm kind of the container of the 9-tailed fox, he said. His voice had gotten a little deeper and a little rougher. The 4th couldn't really kill him because tailed beasts are just chakra and kind of immortal. So instead he sealed him inside me when I was a baby. He chuckled nervously, not knowing what his teammate would think. The Kyuubi's chakra gives me enhanced stamina and healing even when I'm not consciously channeling it. It increases even more if I do though. He gestured to his chest, where the last of the wounds were closing completely. The cuts had been deep though, and it looked like he would have some nasty scars. The oppressive feeling of the chakra that Hinata didn't even realize was there, dissipated as Naruto's eyes turned blue again. The breath she didn't know she was holding was let out. Naruto-kun, Hinata stuttered out. I get it if you don't want to be teammates anymore. Most of the people in the village don't really like me because of what the fox did. The Hokage can make other arrangements. Naruto said, avoiding eye contact. Hinata hated it, hated seeing Naruto so shy and small. The boy who she had seen as a knight in shining armor ever since the day he had saved her from those bullies 5 years ago, even when he left the village. The warmest person she had ever met, felt so cold. He didn't have any of his normal brightness or warmth at the moment. She wouldn't stand for it. Naruto-kun, I don't care what you have sealed inside you, or that the villagers don't like you. Determination leaked into her voice. She could be brave for him. She felt brave because of him. You're just Naruto. You wouldn't hurt a fly if it wasn't bothering anybody, and you definitely wouldn't ever attack the village. You're the strongest person I know, and I think even higher of you now that I know what you've had to deal with. He looked up at her in surprise. After a moment, she asked the question she already knew the answer to. Is that why you left the village all those years ago? He nodded. He was slightly shaky on the details himself, most of it felt like a nightmare. He did remember waking up in the hospital when he was 7 though, and he remembered bits and pieces of the night that put him there. It was Hinata's turn to be pissed. She could have been spending time with him for the last 5 years. She could have been friends with him for all that time if it weren't for the villagers. They're dumb, she said finally. Naruto's head flipped nearly sideways in question, his hair flopping from one side to the other comically. The villagers who don't like you. They're dumb. I can see that even without my Byakugan. She held her chin up, a little bit of playful arrogance leaking into her voice. Neither of the boys had seen this side of Hinata. They were shocked. She was always the shy girl that stuttered through most conversations and didn't step on anybody's toes. She certainly hadn't ever called anybody dumb before. Neither knew what to say, so she spoke again. You both are covered in blood. We should get you cleaned up before more animals come hunting us because of the smell. And just like that she turned away and leapt off the branch they were on. What they didn't know was that she was embarrassed by her sudden confident display, and didn't want them to see her face turn red. Sasuke was the first to recover from his shock, closing his mouth, before opening it to speak again. Come on, Naruto. Let's go. We don't want to get left behind. Naruto's mouth was still wide open, but he nodded and stood up to follow. Day 7 Forest of Death. Yamato was happy with his students' progress. After the scare with the jaguar, they had made progress bordering on the extreme. It pained him for them to have to go through that, and if either of the other students had taken the blow, he would have pulled them right out. He knew the Kyuubi would prevent Naruto from dying though. He would have liked to intervene and keep the jaguar from ever striking Naruto, but he had to stay at least 50 meters away to stay out of Hinata's Byakugan range. Besides, if they survived that, they would get an immense amount of experience from it. It wasn't the same as being attacked by another ninja, but it was as close as they could, safely, get. They did survive, and now, after a week in the forest, they were showing improvement. Everything they did was sharper, crisper, and more cautious. They worked together more seamlessly. Hinata was beginning to join the boys in their wordless communication. They were adapting the basic academy hand signs to fit their needs, and very little needed to be spoken when they came across a dangerous situation. They were eating just fine. Hinata was using her Byakugan to help locate prey for the boys to go after, and using her knowledge of herbs and plants to help round out their diet. Naruto was using his clones more liberally, having them take watch, erect barriers, and guard them. It seemed as if his sensory abilities had gone up another notch, as all of the sudden Naruto's head would shoot up, and the three would up and leave, only to have a large animal come grazing through the area a minute later. Sasuke had improved the most though. Yamato could just see the red glint of his Sharingan as he kept it activated for a large portion of the day, only deactivating it when he had to rest them. He was getting faster, probably as fast as Naruto now, if not faster, and his movements became cleaner and more efficient. They had retrieved the shuriken from their first real battle, though the kunai were nowhere to be found, and his skill with them had increased too. They had come all this way, and they still had another week to go. Day 12 Forest of Death. Sasuke had no idea that it had happened, but the first time he activated his Sharingan after the incident with the jaguar, Naruto flipped out. He had unlocked the third tomo. In both eyes. From what he knew, this was fairly uncommon, usually it was one at a time per eye. He knew that the increased perception would cause strain on his body to keep up with it, so he kept them active as long as he could. His body quickly caught up, until it felt mostly the same as it had with 2 tomo. The only difference now was that he could keep up with Naruto, and Naruto looked like he was moving in slow motion. He loved his eyes. Naruto had taken on the role of protector for the team. His clones were invaluable. They were an early warning scouting system, a barrier team, a defense team, an attack team, evacuation team, manual labor team, and everything in between. Better yet, they returned their memories to him, so he was getting experience several-fold in each of those areas. His sensory abilities had gone up another notch, and a ring of clones could give them at least a minute of warning before most dangerous animals could reach them. He had added the usage of a 4th chakra chain pretty comfortably, which greatly increased his barrier usage and chakra suppression. Hinata's range with her Byakugan had increased due to her heavy usage of it. She could see about 75 meters with it now, up from the 50 she could see when she entered the forest. She could also spot their sensei watching, just on the edge of her range, and was silently furious that he hadn't intervened to help Naruto. The three genin of Team 7 had developed a comfortable system that now allowed them some free time. The forest required the ninja to be on edge at all times, but a week into their time in it, and they were learning how to relax while keeping their senses razor sharp. Because of this, they felt relatively safe training and exploring. So long as somebody, usually Naruto's clones, kept watch. Most of this time was spent having Hinata practice her gentle fist against Sasuke, who was still in the final stages of adjusting to his Sharingan. This left Naruto to his own devices. He had 10 clones spread out in a circle around their camp at all times, sitting in a meditative pose to sense any possible threats. Another 10 were paired up with the sensors, so that if a sensor dispelled to warn Naruto, the paired clone could run interference to give them more time. The paired 10 would all work on something, from chakra control to his chakra chains, so long as what they were doing didn't draw unwanted attention. It seemed chakra usage would keep the smaller animals away, but draw the attention of the larger, more deadly animals. Naruto wasn't sure if they could sense it, or if they were just hearing or smelling the effects of the chakra usage. Either way, it had to stay limited, even if they were better prepared for attacks. Naruto, the real one, was working on his physical attributes. Sasuke had caught up to his speed, and with the Sharingan, he'd never be able to outdo him in hand-to-hand. There were 3 solutions to that. Get faster, get stronger, get more efficient. While the last option could be done by clones training, the first 2 could only done by the original. So here he was, working feverishly at getting both stronger and faster. He was currently bouncing between trees at full speed while carrying rocks in a makeshift backpack. He really wished he had his sealing kit, then at least he could put the weight in a modified storage seal that didn't account for weight. The whole point of a storage seal was to counteract the weight of items stored. His idea would make him feel like he was carrying rocks, just without the awkward swaying and position of them. He had done a lot of thinking since he had awoken from the jaguar's attack. The jungle cat had put a lot of his skills into perspective for him. He needed to get better at sensing. His clones were improving with the skill, but he was unable to do it well without thinking about it, and that was the reason the jaguar struck without any real notice. The whole team had learned the lesson that they needed to be on guard more often, and had quickly rectified that individually, without even discussing it. They would not be ambushed like that again. He also was thinking about his fuinjutsu. It didn't do him a lot of good if he didn't have his kit with him. Sure, he kept the stuff sealed on him at all times, but storage scrolls could be broken, no matter how strong they were made. He knew in theory that sealing could be done without a brush or ink well. His father had been able to leave his Hiraishin mark without it. He hadn't figured out how yet. Thus, he had clones pondering it as he trained, but the thought hadn't left his head either. He had a theory that if he could convert his chakra into ink, that he could control where it went, and theoretically make seals with sheer chakra control and manipulation. This was easier said than done. His trial run with water chakra had gone poorly to say the least. He could hardly separate a blob of water on the ground into 2 or 3 separate blobs without breaking into a full sweat. Arranging the chakra into the fine intricacies of even a basic storage seal would require much more precise chakra control. He still hadn't even tried to convert his chakra into usable ink, but he was sure that would be the easier of the 2 parts. As he wound down his sprint training by dumping the load of rocks off his back, he began to contemplate. Necessity and survival had demanded that he up his shadow clone count. Jiraiya had severely limited his clone training as there really wasn't any precedent for the sheer numbers Naruto would be able to put up. The most Jiraiya had ever used it for training-wise was studying up on fuinjutsu, and he always limited the number of clones, and the time they were in existence. He claimed he would still come away with a headache. The forest had demanded that Naruto use more than the clones Jiraiya had allotted him, and for longer too. He kept increasing the number and time, expecting some sort of backlash, but it never came. Sure, he'd get a minor headache at the moment they dispelled, but he was running 30 clones for several hours in a row at this point, and hardly noticing any downside. He'd have to report this to Jiraiya through Toad summoning at some point. First though, he wanted to push his limits a little bit. Naruto sat down just inside the encirclement of his clones that defined Team 7's current camp. He had 30 clones in existence right now, and he decided he could definitely handle 30 more. With a cross-hand seal and a little bit of chakra, far less than it used to take for him, they popped into existence. The clones had their orders already, so Naruto didn't need to tell them what to do. 20 clones found their own clear patch of dirt or rock to work on, and began attempting to make a basic storage seal design out of chakra-laced water. They couldn't come close yet, but he was hoping to change that quickly. The other 10 just found an open space, and began trying to convert some of their chakra into an ink substance that could be used for seals. None of them could do their task yet either, but he stayed confident. He made one more clone, and popped it right away, so that it could send orders to the others. Any clone not on sensing duty, about 20 of them, were to work on chakra control. He was determined to get this down before he left the forest. He'd be damned if he didn't leave here much stronger than he came in. It was only noon, so the original went to watch Sasuke and Hinata spar, figuring he could still work on strength while doing so. 3 hours of push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and other bodyweight exercises, and Naruto was drenched in sweat. He had long since pulled off his clawed-up mesh armor. His wooden geto were off too. They had gotten annoying to put up with in a survival situation. As he watched Sasuke and Hinata resume their sparring, Naruto contemplated his uniform. He loved dressing like Jiraiya, he liked the way it looked, and it was unique from anyone else he had seen, especially amongst shinobi. However, the outfit, while technically built for shinobi combat, wasn't really optimal for situations like this, as he had found out. He would have to consider a change for when his team was sent out on missions. It wouldn't do to perform suboptimally just because of clothes. He was sure Jiraiya would understand. Naruto's thoughts shifted to his 2 teammates. They appeared to be making strides just as great as he was, though not if his clones would have anything to say about it. Sasuke was making easy work of Hinata, but still pushing her to improve. He was a good sparring partner for her in that he had eventually coaxed her to go harder and not pull her chakra-enhanced blows. Naruto didn't blame her, he would want to hit the grumpy bastard full force too if he had the chance. Thinking of Hinata holding back made him frown internally. She had a kind heart, maybe the kindest Naruto had ever seen. He didn't want this to be a pitfall for her, so he decided that he should do something about it. "Oi, Sasuke." The raven-haired genin's head snapped to him, expecting a sensory alert. "Mind if I jump in a little bit? Fighting my own clones has gotten boring, I always win, ya know," he said with a grin. Hinata stifled a giggle while Sasuke rolled his eyes. "Sure, Naruto. Just try not to lose too badly." Naruto stuck his tongue out at the Uchiha, knowing he wouldn't be able to say anything to rile him up. It hadn't been lost on him that he had hardly called him loser since the attack. Naruto made his way in front of Hinata, and nodded at her when he adopted his special Uzumaki taijutsu stance. He waited for her to make the first move, determined to bring out a little bit of her aggression. 10 seconds went by before she finally lunged at him. He didn't move, there was no need to. Hinata's eyes widened when she saw he wasn't dodging or blocking. She pulled up on her palm strike as much as she could, and held back her chakra. Her open palm struck Naruto's very firm and very bare chest right above his heart and stayed there. The blonde didn't even sway an inch. He looked at Hinata, down at her hand laying on his chest, then back up at Hinata. She blushed. "Hinata, why aren't I dead?" he asked bluntly. There was a small goofy smile on his face, as if this were the most casual thing in the world. The gentle fist is supposed to attack the organs inside the body, is it not? You just struck my heart yet I felt nothing. I didn't want to hurt you, so I pulled back, Naruto-kun. She replied, blush growing from pink to a more solid red. She could feel his strong heartbeat. If you were going to hurt me, I would have dodged, but you were holding back right from the start, he said, a little more serious, but not enough to really put her down. How will Sasuke, the great Uchiha, or I, the strongest genin, Sasuke grunted from the sidelines, ever get any stronger if our sparring partner is holding back, ya know? He asked, as if he was hurt that she wouldn't help them. She heard the sarcasm in his voice, but her blush still grew. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. I'm just scared of hurting a comrade. I don't like to see the people that I care about in pain. She answered shyly. Hinata, you've seen Sasuke and I spar. We go hard against each other, and we come away with injuries, but that's how we learn. Sasuke almost cut my ear off last week with a sword strike, and I learned to move my head out of the way of fast-moving sharp blades. She giggled at him. She couldn't help it, he could make her feel so at ease while discussing serious topics. That's the way sparring works. Pain is one of the greatest teachers. If you feel it, that means you're still alive. If you never experience the pain of the mistakes, there won't be proper motivation to improve. Plus, if you hit me right, I might just shut up for more than 5 minutes. He smiled big, and this time she laughed. You are right, Naruto-kun. I promise not to hold back anymore. She replied, much more confident in herself after the blonde's mini-speech. Naruto nodded, but stayed there for a second. He looked at Hinata. Hinata-chan? You can take your hand off my chest now. He rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, cheeks slightly pink. Hinata's whole face and neck had gone completely red, and she jerked away from her teammate. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. She squeaked out. Naruto chuckled at her shy antics, he thought it was kind of cute. It's okay, Hinata. Let's get back to the spar. I'm itching for some competition, ya know. He grinned. When the flush left her face, she turned around. Sliding into the gentle fist stance her clan was famous for, she let a small smile grace her face. She would become strong enough to keep up with the boys and stand beside them. Naruto was starting to regret making Hinata go all out. He was holding back, and still no doubt winning the spar, but he was hurting. The gentle fist was no joke. It had started as a blow to the shoulder, and it went numb. It was hard to move your arm if you couldn't feel your shoulder. Blows to the other arm and both legs soon made it hard for him to move at all. It was all healing, nearly faster than Hinata could hit him, thanks to the Kyuubi. He also could have switched to his father's style, which was more based on speed and avoiding blows, whereas the Uzumaki style would intentionally take blows to land harder ones, but he wanted to build her confidence. Hinata was a key part of the team. Naruto and Sasuke would be the main combatants, but she was the one who had the power to put down larger and stronger opponents with a tough exterior. He hobbled over to where Sasuke was sitting, putting on a bit of a show for Hinata's sake. Sasuke rolled his eyes at him, he stuck out his tongue in return. You got beat just bad enough, huh? Sasuke questioned. Naruto locked eyes with Sasuke's Sharingan, and an understanding passed between them. There was a deeper meaning in those words, one that conveyed approval at boosting Hinata's confidence. You'd get beat just as bad if she'd go all out. He grunted back. That one hadn't been exaggerated, she had caught him in the ribs pretty good, and he was pretty sure she lacerated one of his lungs. Oh well, it'd be healed in a little bit. I hate when you do that. Sasuke grunted with a grin. It was Naruto's turn to roll his eyes. He continued walking to the part of the clearing that his clones had taken over. It had been several hours since he left them to their own devices, and he was eager to see the results. Before he did though, bit his thumb, and rolled familiar seals to summon his favorite toad. A small poof of smoke revealed Gamikichi, who had grown to a size that he would hardly fit on Naruto's head anymore. Sup, Kichi. Sorry I don't have any treats for you, we're still in the forest, but I'll give you double next time. He promised. That's what you said last time you summoned me, Naruto. Oh, that's right. Well then I'll bring triple, or would it be quadruple? He asked rhetorically. Doesn't matter, I'll bring a lot. For now I got something new I've been working on that I want you to see. Gamakichi nodded. He and Naruto had struck up a bond, and Naruto often summoned him when he was working on a technique. Gamakichi was never all that much help, aside from the regular oohs and ahs, but Naruto just seemed to enjoy the company. The blonde silently dispelled all but the sentry clones and their backups. The influx of memories made him flinch, but all in all the feedback wasn't so bad. He recalled the memories of the 40 or so clones that had been training for the last 4 hours and smiled. Sitting down on the ground, he leaned toward the bare section of ground in front of him. He channeled his chakra and focused, closing his eyes. As he focused, a blob of chakra began to condense into a black substance. It looked too watery to be proper sealing ink, but it was a start. Concentrating harder, he tried to form the chakra into a storage seal. The chakra moved under his command, but did so sluggishly. After 30 or so seconds of intense concentration, he had a whole lot of nothing. It was clear the chakra was moving into the right locations, but he couldn't refine it enough. The lines weren't small enough, and he couldn't execute the small curves and strokes necessary for a seal. Right now it looked like someone took a wet paintbrush and handed it to a monkey that started slapping it on the ground. This wouldn't pass as a seal, but he made huge progress in a short amount of time with his clones. He even mused that he could finish by nightfall if he increased the clones, and then he realized that he couldn't think of a reason not to. So, what do you think? He asked his familiar summon. You trying to learn sealing with just chakra? That's pretty impressive stuff, Naruto. Pops says that was one of the keys to the Yondaime's jutsu. Gamakichi replied, maybe you can use it to seal some snacks on Ya, huh? Naruto just eye-rolled at his summon, and got back to work. First he made 30 clones. These would go replace the 20 that were on guard duty, and also expand the zone that they were covering. He would need more room. When the guard duty memories came back, he smiled. The 10 that weren't sensing had increased his chakra control greatly. 4 hours of straight chakra control times 10 clones and he had a full work week of just control all in one afternoon. The 20 dispelled clones hadn't affected him much, so he decided to go relatively big, or go home. And he couldn't go home. 100 clones. Made in 4 groups of 25. He knew that he could make them all at once, but it felt weird mass-producing himself like that. 25 felt more manageable, and he could give the orders to each group soundlessly. First 25 chakra control, increase by any means necessary. Start dispelling every 10 minutes after the first hour, poof. They appeared and took off. Second 25 chakra conversion. Ink needs to be a better viscosity and less clear. Dispel every 15 minutes until there's 10 left, poof. Third 25 forming the storage seal on the ground, using water chakra or water-laced chakra. Dispel every 15 minutes until there's 10 left, poof. Final 25 forming the seal using the ink. Dispel every 10 minutes until there's only 5 left, poof. He was a little dizzy after making such large groups of himself so quickly, but he thought it was necessary. He found that his clones, much like himself, didn't really like being given orders. If he thought exactly what he wanted before he created them, they came into existence thinking it was their idea, and wouldn't argue or slack off. It wasn't the most honest way to lead, but he was leading himself, and he figured it was his idea, so he wouldn't mind. Having the clones dispel at intervals should have 2 purposes. One would be to stave off a potential headache, and the second would be to pass on their knowledge to the remaining clones, so that they could improve upon it. It was his opinion that doing it this way allowed the clones to work more efficiently. While he wouldn't be logging as many total hours, every time a clone dispelled, the others would be working with increased skill. By the time the last 5 or 10 clones were left, they would have the knowledge of 20 or so other experiences to work with. It wasn't always the best solution, but when he was trying to figure something out, this seemed to work best. Raw chakra control and studying were a little bit different, as were refining techniques that he'd already figured out, like his taijutsu or certain ninjutsu. Either way, it was a beautiful thing watching 100 of himself get to work, determined to learn a new technique. He left them to their business to go hang out with Sasuke and Hinata. Team chemistry was just as important as skill after all. The 3 genin sat around a campfire, courtesy of Sasuke, enjoying each other's company. Naruto was really enjoying being part of the team. Sasuke had been his only real friend his age for a long time, and when they were together it was all training all the time. Having Hinata added in balanced the group out well, and he was grateful to have 2 people his age to call close friends, if not family. After a few hours of lazing around, Naruto sat up suddenly. He instantly had the attention of both of his teammates. My clones think the jaguar is coming back. His statement was short and efficient. He was in what Sasuke had come to think of as his commander mode. He became a consummate shinobi, not a lot of wasted energy or emotions. Efficient. A true leader. Let's pack up then, Sasuke said. They had already decided they would avoid the stronger predators. Naruto nodded. There wasn't much to pack, but they had collected a few items while in the forest. A deer skin that had been turned into a backpack, another one that carried water, a cool stick Naruto had found that he liked to swing around and pretend it was one of his swords. The boys had just started to get up when Hinata spoke. No, she said quietly, but firmly. Uchiha and Uzumaki tilted their heads at her, silently questioning like 2 puppy dogs. She obliged. I do not think we should run. It only got us last time because we were surprised and Naruto-kun was hurt. We will not have truly improved if we keep running from the stronger predators in the forest. We should fight it together. Sasuke raised an eyebrow with crossed arms at her confidence, and Naruto put on a 1000-watt smile for her. They didn't even need to look at each other to come to a conclusion. They were in. Sasuke was the one that replied, having been conscious the last time that the jaguar pounced. Alright, here's the plan. Day 14, Forest of Death. Gen and Team 7 were making their way to the exit of the Forest of Death. Yamato had let them in somewhere between midday and midnight, and so they were to head out at roughly the same time. As they cleared the fence that denoted Training Ground 44, they smiled at each other, but didn't relax. Their sensei appeared in front of them by way of Shunshin moments later, confirming to the boys that he had indeed been watching them, just as Hinata said. It irked Naruto a little bit that he couldn't sense his teacher, even if he was probably a former Anbu. You made it, Yamato said. It was said as a statement, but they could feel the question in it. No thanks to you, Hinata said coldly. She could be a true Hyuga if she really wanted to. Yamato quirked his head ever so slightly at this. She had grown more than he thought. Perhaps Naruto and Sasuke had too. The latter confirmed his response when looked at his eyes, and saw 3 tomo in each. Grown immensely apparently. He could feel the change in their chakra, it was denser and sharper, on edge the whole time. He could see the change in the way they carried themselves, like they were not just ready for an attack, but expecting one. He had kept watch over them, but 50 meters was far, and he couldn't see details such as the tomo in eyes, or exactly what Naruto had his clones doing. He was curious as to the nature of the blonde's training. It made sense logically in that shadow clones returned their experiences, but they didn't seem to be doing much besides chakra control and playing in the dirt. Relax guys, Yamato's sensei would have stepped in if things got too rough. It's just as I said, Hinata, your training has to have a certain amount of pain in order to be truly helpful. Naruto said. Hinata relaxed slightly. Sasuke's eyes deactivated. Anyways, Yamato-sensei, we got you this. Naruto held up what looked like the claw of a big cat. It looked a little small to be a tiger's, so Yamato guessed it came from the jaguar they took down. He couldn't be sure as the trio had gone on a small tear through the forest in order to claim their spot as apex predator. They hadn't killed a lot of the animals, only those that fought back hard. The jaguar, a few tigers, and a large bear. The claw had a hole through it on the top, with a small strip of leather weaved through it. A necklace. Upon closer look, all 3 genin appeared to be wearing one, though Naruto's was on a black leather strap that looked like it had been bought rather than made makeshift in a forest, and it sat next to the strange leaf pendant he had been wearing when he went in. Go on, take it. The blonde pushed it forward some more. We're still pissed at you for sending us into the hellhole, but we know you did it for our own good. He said with a smile. His eyes said there would be payback though, and Yamato felt a drop of sweat form on his forehead. 4 claws. 1 for each member of Team 7. Yamato supposed that they all came from the paw that had sliced open Naruto. Symbolic then, of their first real test. He felt a little touched that they had thought of him. He slipped the necklace over her, gratefully, and allowed a tight-lipped smile to show. He would have to find a more refined leather strap in the merchant district for it. Yamato realized the blonde hadn't been holding the necklace when they cleared the fence though. He had summoned it from a seal. Naruto, I thought I told you no sealing kit? Only the tools I allowed. Naruto smiled in return. I didn't have a kit, I found a way around it. Naruto held out one hand, and with the other, seemed to place a storage scroll on his open palm. Yamato didn't say anything about the impressive feat. He was under strict orders not to let him get a big head. Anyway, thank you for the necklace. He replied. See guys? I told you he'd like it ya know. Naruto said, excited to truly be together with his team. I do apologize for putting you through that. It wasn't something I wanted to do, and it wasn't something any newly minted genin team should have to do, but it was necessary. Yamato said to his team. Why's that? Naruto asked dumbly. Before Yamato could answer, Naruto suddenly sharpened up. His teammates followed suit, and they leapt back from a kunai with an attached explosive note. Hinata and Sasuke's dojutsu sprung to life, and Naruto threw up a hand seal but didn't stop there. 3 clones popped into existence, using their chains to surround and barrier off the explosive tag. The original flung a kunai that appeared out of nowhere into the trees up and to his left. The hand seals that he had formed turned one kunai into 20, peppering the area that the explosive tagged kunai had come from. His teammates covered his flanks, keeping an eye out for the opponent. All three seemed to follow the incoming shunshin. That's why, came the lazy drawl of the masked Jonin. The explosive tag exploded, completely contained by Naruto's barrier. Sasuke joined the blonde in groaning. "That wasn't cool, Kakashi-sensei." Naruto said. "Ma, not everything is about being cool, Naruto." Kakashi replied. He still slouched into a lazy stance, but it was noticeably sharper to all three genin. "Besides, I was just trying to show off your skills. Look at how well you reacted. 2 weeks ago you would have moved slower and later, Sasuke would have fired off a flashy fire jutsu, leaving you unguarded in your return fire, and Hinata would have been too scared to move in time. Now you look like a well-oiled machine, and you haven't even received training from your Jonin-sensei." Kakashi said. It pissed Naruto and Sasuke off at how right he was. They wanted to argue, but there wasn't anything to be said. Hinata blushed ever so slightly at the praise from the man in charge of this year's genin. "See? Even you know it, Naruto, and you're the dumbest one," Kakashi said, with no real venom in his tone. Naruto resented that. "Well, we didn't get a cool jaguar claw necklace for you. It's only for members of Team 7, so suck on that, Kakashi." The blonde yelled childishly. Kakashi just gave them his trademark eye smile, and laced his finger around the cord on his neck and showed off his newest accessory. "Don't worry, I managed to get one so I could be a part of the team too," he taunted. Kakashi didn't wait for a response, and left very leaf shunshin. "I hate him." "Me too," the Uchiha echoed. "I think he's funny," Hinata said, still stifling her giggles. "Traitor," the two boys said simultaneously, turning her giggles into laughs. Yamato smiled again, this time at the camaraderie of the team. 2 weeks together and you would never know that they hadn't been together for 2 years. He was excited to get to work. "Okay, test number 2 has been passed. We begin real training tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Be prepared, it will be difficult. We also have D-ranked missions to make up from your 2 weeks in the Forest of Death. I look forward to our time together," Yamato said, before he too left via shunshin. "What the hell? Did he just say Forest of Death?" Naruto asked. Nobody had said the place was named after death. He probably wouldn't have been so eager to go in if he knew that. "Come on, moron, let's go get some food." It was a testament to her growth that Hinata tagged along without even being specifically asked. The 2 weeks in the Forest of Death had been the glue that solidified the chemistry of the team. "Ramen?" Naruto asked. It wasn't a question though. He hadn't had ramen in 2 weeks. They were going to Ichiraku's no matter what. Sasuke sighed, and Hinata giggled. Chapter 12. The Calm Before the Storm. Team 7 was given 3 days off in reward for their 2 weeks in the Forest of Death. Naturally, a day off for them, the boys in particular, wasn't really a day off. Naruto was busy abusing his clones in exchange for sealing practice and knowledge. He had sent word through Toad summoned to Jiraiya, and was waiting to hear back to see if he would be allowed to up his training regimen even more. Currently, he wasn't going over the roughly 100 clone training limit he had used in the forest, though they were going for several hours at a time. The unfortunate part of his newly discovered sealing technique, which he was dubbing ink release, was that he had to practice each seal he had in his current repertoire. Just because he could make a basic storage seal with his jutsu, didn't mean he could make an explosive tag. The fortunate part was that once he had the technique down, and he had it down, it only took his 100 clones a few hours tops to master a new seal design. In the 3 days since they left the forest, Naruto had been able to master 8 of his seals, as well as 2 new ones that his clones had learned through reading. The rest of his training wasn't exactly neglected either. While he wasn't physically developed enough to use resistance seals, they could stunt the growth of chakra coils if used too early in life. That didn't mean he couldn't resistance train. He was using his ink release sealing jutsu to put modified storage seals on his body, and then, with the help of his clones, sealing weights into them. The modifications allowed the user to feel the weight of what was sealed, and spread the weight across the entire body. This removed several negative aspects of typical weight training. He wouldn't be encumbered by the bulkiness of the weights. The distribution of the weight was even, so it wouldn't affect his taijutsu or running forms when they were removed. The weight could also be added upon with ease. Instead of buying a new, heavier set of weights, he could simply buy another light set to add, or just grab a few rocks. The only real downsides that he could see was that the weight couldn't be ditched as easily, and it put more stress on his spine than strictly necessary, meaning he had to limit the time per day he could use it. Still, he was making great strides with his speed and strength. Sasuke was training separately from Naruto, though they were never far from each other while doing so. He had dug into the old Uchiha scrolls that were in the clan head's personal library. He had essentially resigned that Naruto would be faster than him. The Kyuubi healed his muscles from training much too fast and efficiently for Sasuke to be able to keep up, not to mention Naruto was already naturally fast to begin with. Speed wasn't everything though, and while Naruto had his Biju, Sasuke had his eyes. Efficiency would be how he counteracted pure speed, but there wasn't a different aspect that the Uchiha was currently focusing on. Genjutsu. That was Naruto's biggest weakness. He was no slouch compared to other genin. He could detect and dispel just about anything C rank and lower with ease. Some B ranks and most A ranks could ensnare him though. He had plenty of chakra output to break them, but his senses could be tricked into thinking he was dispelling with chakra when he actually wasn't. Sasuke was sure that was how Kakashi had gotten him. Sharingan Genjutsu could also be notoriously subtle, and he could use it to steer Naruto into decisions that favored him. The clan scrolls were only accessible with a 3-tomo Sharingan, a special clan genjutsu that was used on nearly all the clan scrolls to limit who could access them. Sasuke's upgraded hardware opened up many avenues. The Sharingan itself was feared for the help it provided its users, but it was the 3-tomo version that made the clan so feared. The insight it granted users was unbeatable. The user could weave genjutsu nearly instantaneously through eye contact. Something as subtle as causing the victim to want to use water style, or as bullish as requiring them to try and stab their own teammate. The genjutsu options were nearly limitless, and Sasuke was intent on learning them. Hinata was also training, though she didn't have much say in the matter. Her father had been happy that she had passed both of her tests, and with the report her Jonin sensei, a man he respected, had turned in. He did, however, think that she required more training. Given the status of her two teammates, and the reason the team was put together, it was safe to say that Team 7 would be in the village, and the rest of the world's spotlight. It wouldn't do for her to embarrass the Hyuga in such a capacity. For that reason, Hiyashi Hyuga had once again taken his eldest daughter's training into account. She was still weak, especially compared to her younger sister, who was a Hyuga heiress through and through. Hiyashi did note, however, that she wasn't holding back quite so much. It was at the Hyuga clan compound that Naruto met up with Hinata. The blonde had managed to sneak into the dojo reserved for the main house via shadow clone. His clone didn't like what he saw, and ended up sparring with Hinata until the real him could get there. They continued the spar once the flesh and blood version of Naruto arrived. It was clearly written on the clan head's face that he had never seen Hinata fight like that. Naruto was glad that he and Sasuke could bring out that side of her, but he wished she would do it all the time. He wasn't a fan of the way her clan viewed her. They thought her weak, when he knew she was strong. It was frustrating. He was brought out of his thoughts by the scuffling of Hinata's sandals. Her very new, and much more feminine sandals. In fact, her whole outfit was different. Naruto eyed Hinata analytically. The forest had changed her, just as it had changed him and Sasuke too. She wore the same navy shinobi pants as before, with her kunai holster bandaged to her right thigh. Her shinobi sandals now only had straps just short of her toes and up around her ankle, leaving much more of her foot exposed. They even had a small heel to them, and were much more feminine than her previous pair. She wore the same mesh body armor underneath her jacket, which was where the biggest change occurred. She no longer wore the baggy cream-colored jacket with fur lining. In its place she had on a lavender zip-up jacket, with white sleeves and a white hood. While it wasn't skin-tight like a lot of Kunoichi's uniforms, it was much more form-fitting than before. He could actually see the figure of his Kunoichi teammate, one that was much more developed than he would have thought before they entered the forest. Naruto shook his head out of the gutter. The forest tended to dissuade you from the unnecessary. First, he had learned to ditch his sealing kit, though he still practiced as it was a part of the discipline and needed for more complex seals. Then, Naruto had put in an order for new clothing that should be ready any day now, and he suspected Sasuke had too. There was no reason to be surprised at Hinata's change, in fact it was expected. Still though, she looked so much more girly, yet stronger at the same time. He liked it. He returned to his analytical view of his teammate. She had bruises in every exposed area, and no doubt in some of the hidden ones as well. She had grown her hair out a little since joining the team, and it was just starting to reach the top of her jacket. It was the longest that he had ever seen it. Her headband was, as always, hanging from her neck. The jaguar claw necklace was hard to spot. It hung just below the headband, and just above the top of the jacket zipper, right where the cleavage of her breasts would have started, if she chose to expose any. He blushed ever so lightly. Naruto shook his head again. Why was he having such a hard time focusing? She looked tired, like she'd been training for a long time, but he saw the determination in her eyes, and he grinned. I like your new outfit, Hinata. It looks really good, and way more comfy than your old stuff too. Do you want me to put any seals on it? He asked. Hinata smiled softly in return, her cheeks tinging pink. That would be great, Naruto-kun. Thank you. Naruto rubbed the back of his head in his trademark sheepish motion. Don't worry about it, Hinata. That's what teammates are for, ya know. Hinata only nodded in return. After a few seconds of comfortable silence, Naruto couldn't take the slow pace anymore. Alright, we gotta get Sasuke on the way to the training ground, and I am not walking like this. I feel like a freaking turtle crawling through jello. Come on. He put his hand on Hinata's shoulder, and formed a half-ram seal. The civilians in the area only saw a few leaves floating behind in place of the blonde and his Hyuga teammate. They could only shake their heads at the boys' antics. Team training, the trio had decided, sucked. It wasn't as dangerous as the forest, but there was no downtime either. The forest was the forest, it wouldn't change for you. If you're weak, it will eat you alive. If you're strong, it will be a cakewake. Yamato-sensei's training was the opposite. It started out hard, trying to coordinate between the three of them to best succeed at the tasks. They adapted fast, as they had strong bonds, and a willingness to work together. So, unlike the forest, their sensei adapted. Sasuke wasn't allowed to use his Sharingan, Naruto wasn't allowed to talk, and Hinata couldn't use Gentle Fist. The handicaps grew the better they got, and varied depending on the task. 2 weeks of this found them on Training Ground 7 with Sasuke blindfolded, Naruto with a chakra suppression seal slapped over his mouth, and Hinata with her hands tied behind her back. Still, they persevered. Despite their hatred for their sensei's training, and his slightly sadistic tendencies, they grew fond of the man. He was honest with them, encouraging positive actions, and punishing negative ones. It was quite literally textbook training methods, but after getting to know him, they knew there was no higher compliment than Yamato doing something textbook for you. The man loved his procedures and rules. The training tasks varied. Sometimes, they had to land blows on him, just like with their first genin test. Sometimes they had to reach an objective, sometimes they had to prevent him from reaching one. Yamato told them it was a simulation for real missions. Often they had to protect cargo while they did them. The cargo was usually Naruto's shadow clone, who popped at the slightest hit from their sensei. Therefore, they accurately impersonated most civilian merchants, who were the main procurers of missions. Today they were trying to steal important intel from an enemy shinobi. Their communication was mixed. Naruto couldn't speak, so he had to find non-verbal ways of communicating. The easy fix was to use hand signs. The team's vocabulary and capability with them had grown immensely since they trekked into Training Ground 44. The only problem was Sasuke had a blindfold on. They found quickly that the translation of Hinata reading Naruto's hand signs, and speaking them out loud for Sasuke, was just too slow in battle. Because of this, Hinata was forced into a leadership role, at least for this exercise. She was the only one who could both see and speak, so she had to be the one to make the calls. Plus, with her hands tied up, she wasn't much help in the fight anyway. Yamato had attempted to take away their greatest strengths as a team, so they could better train their weaknesses. Sasuke lost sight, because even without his Sharingan, he had sharp eyes that he relied on too much. His other senses were underdeveloped, at least in comparison to his eyesight and other shinobi skills. He wasn't a natural sensor like Naruto, but that didn't mean that he couldn't sense. He was forced to combine chakra sensing with his other three senses that came in handy while fighting. He couldn't waste jutsu either, which was a habit of his from sparring with Naruto for so long. When your opponent whipped out jutsu after jutsu, it was easy to get caught up in it. Not being able to rely on his strongest sense forced him to be absolutely sure that an attack would land. Naruto lost his voice and his chakra use. The boy was the unspoken, loud-speaking leader of the team, and the glue that held them together. He was also a chakra powerhouse, and needed some more finesse. He needed to understand what it was like for his teammates to fight, given they didn't have his chakra reserves. If he was to be an effective leader, and someday, Hokage, he needed to feel what the average ninja felt. He couldn't properly command them if he thought they could all go non-stop like him. Hinata was handicapped by her clan's styles, and although Jonin-sensei weren't to meddle in clan techniques, nothing was stopping him from showing her its weaknesses or teaching her other things. Because of her teammates' handicaps, she was forced to lead. It didn't suit her one bit, but there were times when she would have to make decisions on her own when Naruto or Sasuke didn't have time to, or weren't there. She would be making chunin in no time too, and would need to be able to lead a team effectively if called upon. Of course, being Team 7, they found a way to make do. Yamato was beginning to become scared of them. They were all chunin level, in his opinion. The boys were quite a bit higher than entry level, but he hadn't seen them go all out, so the sky was the limit for them. The Anbu training that he was giving them had solidified that their weaknesses wouldn't keep them from the level though. Hinata was the weakest, of course, though her taijutsu skills were the best. Even if she couldn't defeat the boys yet, the personal training with Hiyashi, combined with Hinata's renewed effort, had seen to that. She learned quickly, and it didn't take long for her to correct the few mistakes she had. Of course, having Naruto at just about every individual training session was great motivation for her, even if Hiyashi had to bribe the blonde with ramen to get him there. Yamato still wanted her to learn some techniques that weren't her clan's, so that she would have something to fall back on if an opponent was a counter to her. The Byakugan wasn't infallible, nothing was in the shinobi world. It would be good for her to have strength that wasn't hereditary. Speaking of which, now would be a good time to truly show her that, now that he had some jutsu in mind. Break. Take 10, then we'll move to spars. Yamato said. His rhetoric was still short and efficient with them, but some of his emotions had started to leak in, and they could tell he liked being around them. Sasuke yanked the blindfold off his head, and burned it with a small fire jutsu in a tantrum that Academy Naruto would be proud of. Current Naruto made the ram seal and released the chakra-suppressing seal on his mouth, before removing the tag itself. The rush of chakra through his system revitalized him. He immediately made 5 clones, who all began talking at once. Hinata giggled as she unbound her hands from behind her back with quick bursts of chakra from the tenketsu on her wrists. Naruto-kun, you don't have to make clones to talk just because you had to be quiet for a little while. She giggled again. Hinata, you have no idea what it's like to go that long without talking. That was an hour. He yelled, arms waving wildly. Of course I have to use clones to catch up, or I'll always be behind no matter how much I talk, ya know. She had to focus on what he was saying, as another clone was currently trying to talk with her about the merits of using ramen in place of standard medical techniques. He claimed 10 bowls of Ichirakus could replace a surgery. She couldn't help her giggles, the blonde was just so goofy, even when she was sure he was being serious. Sasuke locked eyes with 2 of the clones, Sharingan flaring, and they were put under a basic genjutsu. He made the 2 appear like they had bowls of ramen on their head, and they soon began struggling to lick each other's hair in an attempt to get the liquid gold. This left 2 clones to pester Yamato-sensei about a C-rank mission. The other thing the trio had agreed on in the last 2 weeks was that D ranks were not fun. Hinata didn't seem to mind them that much, but they made her 2 teammates much less enjoyable to be around. The 2 would first complain for an hour about how boring it was and how it was a waste of time. That would then devolve into posturing about who was better at said boring task. They would lock eyes, and the mission would wordlessly turn into a competition. If it was pulling weeds, it was who could pull the most. If it was painting a fence, it was who could paint the most. It was ridiculous stuff to compete over, and the Hyuga didn't get it. It was entertaining enough at times that she didn't complain about them, but she too was beginning to look forward to AC rank. The confidence she had gained over the last month made her feel like they could handle it. It's only been a month, Naruto. No genin team takes a C rank after a month. You're being trained harder than any other team, and it's still recommended that we wait 3. Yamato explained for the 11th time. But we're even better than expected and you know that. Hinata and Sasuke have made gigantic strides, and I can do like 200 things at once. He said, referencing Jiraiya's improved clone training limit. Sure, after 150 he started to get a bad headache, and 200 could make it blinding if they were active for too long, but he could still technically do it. You're not ready. In truth, they were. At least skill-wise. More than ready even, given his view on where their skills rank. They weren't mature enough though. Would Naruto forego a plan to rush headlong into battle? Would Sasuke ignore an order to fight a powerful enemy? Would Hinata freeze up if she had to land a killing blow? What if they came across a Jonin with a team of Chunin? It was almost not possible, but C ranks were C rank for a reason. Leave the village and things can get dangerous fast. It only took one blade to the proper vital to end a life. They either had to acquire more experience through the training exercises and D ranks, or become so strong that their immaturity was not as much of a factor. The second option was coming up scarily fast. We are, and we're willing to prove it, Naruto said. Yamato thought about it for a while, long enough to hear the birds of the forest sing back and forth twice. Fine. In 3 days I'll have a challenge ready for you, and if you pass, I'll allow you to take a C rank. It will be treated like a C rank. You'll be given the mission parameters the night before, and allowed to prepare for it. Fail, and you'll have a week straight of no training, just D ranks. Deal, Naruto shouted, before either teammate could even begin to protest. It wouldn't be maturity that got them the C rank, that was for sure. The genin of this year's rookie class got together at Choji's favorite barbecue joint. This was a new tradition that Naruto was trying to start, at least on a monthly basis, though it was unlikely that they would all be able to show once they started leaving the village regularly. The restaurant was owned by an Akamichi, and as such, was one of the few restaurants that could seat 9 genin, a puppy, and a toad summon. It was also the only restaurant that gave Choji a discount, and he was by far the most expensive of the 9 to feed. The rookie 9 sat in a circular corner booth, grouped by teams, with Team 10 on one end, Choji getting the aisle seat, and Team 8 in the middle, Orochimaru peeking out of Kiba's jacket. Team 7 sat on the other end, Sasuke taking their aisle seat. He had warmed up to the rest of their class admirably, but he still liked his personal space. Naruto was, of course, seated next to him. The blonde was trying to draw him into the conversation by telling wild tales that included Sasuke, and most certainly didn't actually happen. Ino was actively engaging with Naruto, the two blondes unsurprisingly taking up a majority of the conversation. Ino considered herself the center of Konoha's gossip mill, and possibly, the world. Naruto just liked to talk. Somehow though, they didn't clash when put together, instead they worked together to vanquish any possible silence that could be had. Their repertoire together was playful, almost flirtatious. Not that Naruto really knew what it looked like to the others, he just liked talking to her. Kiba, never one to be outdone, was bragging boisterously about how he and Orochimaru were the strongest genin. Sasuke quickly pointed out that the two of them couldn't be one genin. Kiba couldn't wrap his head around that, so the conversation was forced to flow on. Sakura even jumped into the yelling with the boys and Ino. Ever since she started training with Naruto, she had become a little bit more of herself, and a little bit less of what she thought the ideal kunoichi should be. Kurenai had helped strengthen that ideal within her, showing her that a powerful kunoichi was a beautiful one too. She liked it that way, and it seemed like everyone else did too. Except Kiba, whose arm was always bruised from her punches. Choji was too busy stuffing his face with food to jump into the conversation at first, but he joined in between rounds of meat, happy to drag Shikamaru in with him. The Nara thought it was a drag, but he hated letting his friend down, so he obliged. Shino had gone the whole get-together without speaking when Naruto turned to training as a topic. After Team 10 finished complaining about Asuma being a slave driver, Ino's words, Naruto cued the Aburame in. Shino, how's Team 8 doing? Naruto asked. Everybody is in good health and progressing well, Naruto. Shino replied. Naruto's eye twitched ever so briefly at the response, but he recovered and dug deeper. Can you give me specifics on your training? How is your teamwork coming along? The mood soured slightly at this, most noticeably between Kiba and Sakura. Kurenai-sensei is having us work on it, as well as our individual skills. I do not believe Sakura likes having a dog around all the time though, and she doesn't seem to be fond of my insects either. Kiba and I get along fine, though he is brash and ill-tempered. Shino summarized the answer as efficiently and logically as he could, but for some reason both his teammates appeared to be mad at him. He was at a loss, as he knew his observations were correct. Shino, I don't mind your insects one bit, Sakura said, and if that was true, she had grown a lot in the month. My problem is with how you use them. You shouldn't leave them crawling all over us without our permission, Sakura said, heat rising in her voice. It's only logical to place them on my teammates. If an emergency were to occur, I can track them, Shino stated. Yeah, Sakura, what if there's an emergency? Maybe Shino should put more bugs on you just in case? Ino teased. Maybe Shino should put bugs on all of us? I mean, we're all comrades, and it'd be really helpful if somebody needed to be tracked. Right, Ino? Naruto interrupted with a smirk on his face. Bugs didn't bother him, he'd eaten enough on Mount Myoboku to be desensitized to them. They did tend to bother most girls though. Don't antagonize her, Naruto. She's bad enough as it is. A bystander would have thought Shikamaru was just complaining, but any of the rookie 9 knew he was being playful. He just didn't have the energy to properly show it. I don't think you should put your insects on people without their permission, Shino. I give you permission to tag me if you think it's necessary though, Hinata said politely. The slight stutter in her voice was from speaking in front of such a large group. It had been a while since she'd had to speak to anyone but her team or family. I suppose it is not necessary as long as we are in the village. Though there has already been an attempted kidnapping on you, Hinata, so maybe I should mark you, Shino said. Everybody who was listening at least raised an eyebrow at this. Shikamaru, of course, knew what had happened. His mom had forced him to do extra learning on history since he failed the subject 1 year. Naruto was just as curious as everybody else, but he knew Hinata would tell them when she was ready, so he did what he did best and distracted everybody. Speaking of leaving the village, Team 7 has a test tomorrow to determine if we're ready for a C rank, Naruto said proudly. The other 6 genin seemed in awe at this, and Hinata touched Naruto's knee under the table in thanks. Kiba seemed upset that Team 7 was getting first crack at least being tested for a C rank, but Sasuke brought him back down to earth. Kiba, our worst person in each shinobi art, could probably defeat your best with maybe the exception of Genjutsu. He looked at Naruto for confirmation, but the blonde just shook his head. His efforts to learn one had been fruitless so far, as well as taken up a lot of shadow clone training time. It's not a bad thing, you guys just haven't had as much extra training as us, Naruto offered. He didn't want a rift between his classmates just because they were better. TCH. Whatever, Uchiha, Kiba replied. He didn't have a lot of ammo when it came to trash-talking skills. Team 7 really was the best of them. So far at least. It's alright, Kiba. We'll catch up to them soon enough, right guys? Sakura asked. 4 heads nodded, though it went undetermined if Choji's nod was just him chowing down. Naturally, Shikamaru didn't bother to move, but his eyes told the truth. He didn't like being behind any more than them. So what's the test gonna be? Kiba asked. He'd licked his wounds sufficiently, and was curious so his team could learn what they would have to face in the future. The mission scroll says we had to deliver it to the tower in the center of Training Ground 44. We have till sunrise the next morning to do so, so about 19 hours to work with, Naruto explained. 44? That's the Forest of Death, Kiba exclaimed. Genin are forbidden to go in there, and I only know about that because I tried to follow my sister and my mom caught me. That punishment wasn't fun. A look of horror showed on Kiba's face, and a few of the genin shuddered. Most knew what it was like to be punished by parents. Sasuke nodded, not like it'll be our first time. And it's less than a day. No problem at all. Uchiha arrogance strode through into his words. No way you guys have been in there before, Kiba denied. It's true, Kiba. Our genin test was a survival exercise in the forest by ourselves, with minimal equipment, Hinata replied. Wait, is that where you 3 were for all of those first 2 weeks? Ino asked. She was as well informed as ever. All 3 members of Team 7 nodded in their own ways. Hinata shyly, Naruto proudly, and Sasuke smugly. The remaining rookies were even more impressed. 2 weeks alone in the Forest of Death, while the rest of us aren't even allowed in. Kiba shook his head at the realization. They all knew they were behind, but the gap was big enough that they couldn't even see how big it truly was. Now they were getting an idea. They knew that Hinata wouldn't lie to them, she just wasn't. That kind of implication was caught on by all 6 of the other rookies. If only Chunin were allowed, it was safe to say that surviving 2 weeks in there put them at least close to Chunin level. More importantly, their senseis and the Hokage, allowing them, heck, sending them in there, meant that they were probably sure they were Chunin level. They wouldn't risk the lives of the most promising genin so needlessly. 1 month since graduation just wasn't enough time for the rest of them to grow that much. One genin in particular saw the implications better than the rest. His half-lidded eyes dragged slowly over his comrades. He knew the Hokage wouldn't risk their lives that early in their careers without a true need for it. That implied that there was bad news around the corner. Shikamaru inhaled slowly. Troublesome, he thought, before returning his attention, half-heartedly, to the conversation. All 6 genin now had individual plans to step up their training even more. They couldn't afford to get left in the dust. Not by their comrades, and not by their future enemies. Kakashi. Please sit. I'd love to hear your report on the genin, Commander. Hiruzen Sarutobi said, puffing on his pipe. Training is going well. The Hokage gestured for Kakashi to elaborate, though the copy nin already planned on it. All 3 teams' strengths are even better than expected, and they are currently addressing their weaknesses as well as baseline skills. This class of genin will be the most well-rounded we've ever had. Kakashi said, and he meant it. I've received the same reports as you, so I'll spare you the details and just confirm that they are all accurate. The Hokage nodded at that. He had expected as much. I would like to request a shift in the training though. Kakashi said. What he was about to propose had never been done, but then again, there had never been a genin commander. Or 8 clan heirs in one class. Or multiple geniuses on one team. I would like to mix their senseis for training, in addition to larger group training. Kakashi continued. Team 7 and 10 already have nearly flawless teamwork, and Team 8 is way ahead of schedule in that aspect. It seemed that Naruto's efforts to unite the class had paid off. A genjutsu specialist, former guardian ninja, and an Anbu captain. All have different views on what a shinobi is, and the different shinobi arts. It will only benefit them to receive training from each of the 3. Kakashi explained. Hiruzen continued to nod, sitting back in his seat behind his desk. He puffed lazily on his pipe again. Giving Kakashi command of the genin teams was his best idea in a long while. Not only did it help the genin and lessen his load, but it pulled his best jonin further out of the rut that he had been in before he started mentoring Sasuke. I would include Guide too, and train his team in exchange. It will benefit all 12 genin. Kakashi said. Anything else? The Sannin didn't have a problem with any of Kakashi's plans so far it seemed, so Kakashi decided to go for it. Medical ninjutsu. It was part question, part statement. Oh, which ones? The Hokage knew the impact that a skilled medic could have on the battlefield, having trained the best one himself. All of them. All 9. Maybe even Gai's Kunoichi too, if she wants. Sarutobi's eyes raised at this. Kakashi, that will take considerable resources and time to pull off, both of which we are short on, as you know. I'm sure you know that some of them won't be able to learn it, Naruto, for example. Others, Kiba and Sasuke, likely won't want to learn it. Are you sure you want to waste time on it? Respectfully, if there's one thing I've learned, Hokage-sama, it's that Naruto will not be denied. He cares for his teammates and will want to be able to heal them. If he can't do it by conventional methods, he'll invent his own method, just like he did with his unique training. I honestly wouldn't put anything past him at this point. Kakashi said, pride filled his chest, and fire danced in his lone eye. The Sannin nodded, a similar feeling coursing through him. Kiba will see the benefit if it's supplemented with veterinary knowledge. It didn't need to be explained why that would convince the Inuzuka. And Sasuke, well, I'll show Sasuke the upside myself. You won't have to worry about his motivation. Kakashi explained. The Hokage mulled over Kakashi's plans, just as he mulled over the smoke from his pipe. He released them at nearly the same time, first the smoke, followed by his thoughts. I will make it work. See to it that the training is not wasted. I will speak with the head of the medic nin division, and see what kind of resources he can provide. He finally said, "Thank you, Hokage-sama." Kakashi bowed lightly. There is, however, one last thing on the agenda. I'm sure you've heard of the test Team 7 will be undergoing tomorrow to determine if they're ready for a C rank yet? The question was rhetorical, but the Hokage nodded nonetheless. I fully expect them to succeed, and I wish to handpick the mission myself, if that is okay with you? It wasn't normal procedure, but neither was a Genin team taking a C rank 1 month in. Very well, Kakashi. Report back after the test, and I will allow you to sort through the C-ranked assignments. Kakashi bowed, a little deeper this time, and disappeared in a shunshin, leaving a few leaves floating behind. The Hokage just smiled lightly at his antics. A year ago, Kakashi would have lazily walked out with his eye buried in a little orange book. He seemed he was gaining some of his edge back, along with a flair for the dramatic. And that concludes part 2 of this story. Thank you for spending your time here at Ichiraku Ramen and listening all the way to the end. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows the shinobi world to continue through new adventures and alternate timelines. If you enjoyed positive intervention, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Once again, full credit goes to Stolen Hawk 22, the original writer of this story. If you would like to read the original version, you can find the link to the story in the description below. Let me know in the comments what story you would like to hear next. Until the next time, stay safe, and I'll see you again at Ichiraku Ramen.